Oh, perfect.
All
Hello,
right,
Ed.
y'all. Welcome to All Politics are Local, America's number one political hip hop radio talk show. Well, y'all know if it is the first Friday, y'all know it's time for the Payne Report, which is going to be coming up at 8 o'clock with our beloved brother, Congressman Donald Payne Jr. But before that, we're going to have a couple of conversations with a couple of guests, a number of things we're going to talk about. So I'm going to pass it over to John so that he can give you the rundown. Of course, I'm one of your guests. My name is Ed Riley. And so welcome to the show. John?
Hello. I'm very, very honored today to have a wonderful guest, highly intelligent, one of the smartest people I've ever met in my entire life. We have Professor Elise Boddie, who is a um, Harvard Law grad, was a worked for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, among many other things. Professor at Rutgers Law School, and is the newly head of the Institute for the Study of Global and Racial Justice. So we're very honored to have you, and also good friend and person who actually inspired me in my life. So that's a story for another time. But I will have to say that a lot of my whole life goals, the way I look at world, the way I look at race and justice, and she might not know this, but was very much formed by conversations with her. So one of the my favorite people in the world, Elise
Oh,
Boddie, honored to know you. Welcome.
oh, that goes both ways, Jonathan. It's such a pleasure to be here and such an honor to be on your show. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And we had a few people talking about this first topic, right? And in this first topic, or this topic that we are talking about, it is the Supreme Court. We have a new nominee, Biden, who just nominated someone who's a former debater. So that makes me smile. And so we had a few other guests on before talking about this, what it means. Shavar Jeffries talked me down because I was like, "Hey, they're saying you have to get a black woman, and like Clarence is a black man, and you could have a black woman who is puts people in jail. I mean, it might be things that are negative. So if it's not, so he talked me down from, is it more than representation? Is it good? What is this about? Is this a good thing? Nomination?
Oh, I think it's a fantastic nomination. I mean, look, we've had, and I'm sure you and your listeners already know this, but we've had 115 Supreme Court justices. I think 105 of them have been white men. We've had five women, two black men, and never a black woman on the court. And there's something very powerful about seeing yourself in these public institutions and these government institutions. But beyond that, the Supreme Court is the most powerful court in the world. It issues decisions that have profound consequences for American political life, social life. I mean, we can talk about the cases that are going up before the court now. We're dealing with issues of affirmative action, reproductive justice, and access. And so it's certainly true that we don't know exactly how she's going to rule in those cases. That's not guaranteed. But I think just to have someone on the court who has been a public defender, who has extensive experience as a trial court judge, so she's dealt with facts. She's been in private practice. She's just had a variety of different experiences, and in that respect, she's actually more qualified than the justices who are on the court now. I mean, given the breadth of her experience. So. I understand that there's uncertainty, but I'm really happy that she's going to be on, and I do believe she will be confirmed, notwithstanding all the hijinks and nonsense that's happening now in the public sphere around her nomination. Oh, I can't.
Part of what the you can hear me now. Great. Part of what the initial concern always was is a lot of times people talk about representation, and like where there were a lot of debates we had in terms of Elizabeth Warren versus Kamala Harris, right? Like there are they're often it's not who you are, it's what you do. The one thing I like about this nominee, the one thing I really like about this nominee is that she was a criminal defense lawyer. She spent time in the dealing with defending people for federal crimes, and she also was someone who was on the sentencing board, a sentencing commission, to revise a lot of guidelines that were openly racist. So she's someone who's like, hey, these are openly racist, was able to say it. How difficult is it for Black people in certain spaces to actually have conversations about race? And why is what she did in terms of being very open about, no, this is racist, this should change, maneuver that in the way and end up still liked by everyone, still not like what's going on there?
Well, I mean, look, I'm not going to say that necessarily all of her opinions I would have agreed with, or all of her decisions I would have agreed with. So let me just, be clear about that. I think, and we've already seen some of this in some of her earlier Senate confirmation hearings, where she was explicitly asked about race by, I think it was Senator Cornyn from Texas. And the hard thing is that when nominees are asked about, who's asked about race other than Black nominees, and there've been only 3 in the history of the Supreme Court, so there's that. But when Black candidates, Black nominees are asked about this, it's usually done because it's a trap. And so, I think she's going to have to decide what she feels comfortable saying and expressing. But I think to the larger question that you raised about her influence on the court. Look, I don't know, because I've never I did not clerk on the United States Supreme Court as she did. She clerked for Justice Breyer. But she, she'll hire clerks who hopefully will help to inform her opinion. But she'll also develop some relationships with the other justices. And she strikes me, I don't know her personally. I'm sure that we've met or interacted at some point because we overlapped in law school. But she strikes me as the kind of person who is dynamic enough and strong enough to push the justices on the court. This is a very right-wing court. I mean, that's the thing that we have to acknowledge. She will only be able to go but so far. But even when she writes dissents, those dissents can be important for shaping the law for the future. There are some justices in relatively recent memory who started out writing lone dissents and eventually moved into the majority. So yeah.
So what you're saying is that, like, my when I had to be talked down a few weeks ago, I was like, look, man, it's 6'3". It's not going to make a difference anyway, right? Like, what is it? And you're saying that that's not all hopelessness.
It's not. Well, it is. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's not great to have only 3 identifiably liberal justices on the court. And I don't know that she would necessarily even describe herself that way, but just assume for the sake of this argument that she would. But some of the justices, Elena Kagan is especially good about this from what I've seen, that she's able to find a way to reach a broader consensus, or to cultivate a broader consensus. It's a very the process of getting your colleagues to come over to the other side, or to find some space, however narrow, in the opinions where there's agreement, can be helpful, not necessarily in the immediate term, but over the long term, for sure.
When it comes to, you were telling us before about a process of, like, how the Supreme Court works, and is it for the next, like, 20 years, when we went to the courts for civil rights claims? Like, you were a incredible lawyer for the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and our courts kind of like now, you're not just gonna, you don't, it's not the place to go for civil rights. It will not be a remedy. Just find something else. Like what do you have to say in terms of courts as a way to deal with civil rights claims or
Yeah,
human rights?
or even, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, or human rights claims, because Zaid's on, and Zaid corrected me a few weeks ago. He was like, "No, it's not civil rights; it's human rights." So he's over here. So he's here.
That was a different lawyer, different guest altogether.
Fair enough.
You're asking a legal technical question, so right now you're in the right lane.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate that vote of confidence. But look, I think the real answer is that you want to keep all kinds of civil rights, human rights cases out of the court. It's usually a game of keep away. So the problem is that you can't control the kinds of cases that go to the court. You can try to exercise some degree of influence. So when I was at the Legal Defense Fund, we would try to dissuade certain parties from appealing the cases to the Supreme Court. Sometimes successful, sometimes not. But it's a dangerous business, and you certainly don't want race cases there for sure. Unfortunately, the landscape just is terrible on that front. We've got a case about affirmative action going up to the court, in the fall. So, or we expect it will be heard in the fall. So, you're absolutely right. It is a hostile forum for sure.
And so when you're talking about strategies changing, right? You've worked on legal strategies that were part of larger community things, right? Like as someone in the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, you're saying now, right? If you had to do certain strategies from 20 years ago or 10 years ago, there had to be a different path. What would you, as a legal scholar, what do you see as a different path in order to achieve some of these gains?
Yeah, it's a great question. The paths are narrowing, but look, I have to say we have to take what's happening at the state level seriously. There are opportunities in the states, although that increasingly is becoming hostile territory, just given what's happening around voting for sure. But there are some progressive states. New Jersey has been a leader in the voting rights contest, for example. There are other examples around the country of decent legislation. So I would say states definitely have to be on the table. We've concentrated at the federal level for a very long time. I think that was a strategic mistake, quite honestly. There are obviously resource questions. You can't be in every forum. But now we have to, think very, very carefully about where we pursue equity and justice.
I want to bring Zaid in. Zaid is a community activist for over 40 years. He's been involved in so many different movements, from police brutality and violence to South Africa to, you name the movement that has been really important in our community in the last 40 years. Zaid has been a part of it in some way, right? Knows people, has tons of people who are dealing with issues of justice. Is very involved in things with Mumia right now, and so Zaid, what question do you have as someone who's constantly within movements and forefronts activism? What question do you have?
Well, let me just say first, it's a pleasure to. Professor Boddie, you may not remember where we met. We actually met a couple of years ago, and in a very important forum. It was a press conference for us announcing that we were going to put forward a bill to do a task force on the question of reparations and what that would mean for the state of New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so let's go there. Right? Let's go there. But I just wanted to back up on how Jonathan first introduced it. Well, we were talking about human rights. We had you probably know Keesha Taifa. So we're talking about reparations. Another lawyer,
Oh yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And Keesha just recently walked point for an international tribunal we did on human rights violations in the United States. So that's an evidence-based piece that's used in human rights circles internationally. So that was the difference, Jonathan. We're talking now about within the confines of the United States,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I'm raising the question of reparations. We have in an interesting space with this thing in different states, including New Jersey, for all of its backwardness, right? And I'm hard on the state that I live in. I don't pull any punches about the Soprano state, right? But one of the things that has been happening with the reparations legacy is that it's been in the hands in the Black community almost exclusively, almost in the Black nationalist community exclusively for a long time. But just recently, within recent years, we have been breaking ground in multiracial and interracial circles, right? In New Jersey, in interfaith multiracial circles, right? Which is a hugely healthy thing. And a place where we knew we were going to have to go at some point, even if we didn't know when and how it would do that. But as we break this kind of ground, notwithstanding the retrograde energy that is in the courts and in the electoral arena with the Trumpites on the move and being highly mobilized at the moment, as someone who's been at this for some time in an expert way, right? And you were a strong voice at that press conference. I remember you profoundly, right? And I love how you break down the continuing systematic character of how we're still being exploited and discriminated against, right? I love how you break down redline, and I'm borrowing that from you. I have to tell you that, right? How do you see us moving forward and continuing to break ground on the challenge of reparations as a legislative strategy? Because in the end, it's what it
is. Excuse me. Well, I can't, and thank you for that. I'm honored that you would
borrow
from me. That's a high honor. I don't, on the specific legislative strategy, that's not my strong suit. I couldn't say, who we should be maneuvering towards to try to get some buy-in. I think with anything like the issue of reparations that is so challenging because people don't want to own the harm that's been done for generations to Black people, right? So and they don't want to quote unquote pay for it.
That's right.
And so I think the shift to the faith-based community, I think you as you've already said, it had to go there, it needed to go there because ultimately it is it's a question of the spirit, and it's a question of morals, and it's a question of character. And I think that that the faith community can speak to these issues in a way that's hard for people to fully ignore, especially if it's someone of their own faith who's speaking to them. But there clearly has to be look, I would assume there's an inside outside game. So you got people who are maneuvering on the inside with the power brokers. But there has to be sustained community pressure. I think anytime you're trying to dislodge a belief system that is so deeply rooted, racism in the United States, for example, just to take an example, that you have to exert pressure on all sides. So there has to be sustained community pressure. You have to work the elected officials. You have to put pressure on this governor. Beyond that, I don't have a finely tuned, that's just my rough sketch of how I think it structurally should go in terms of what that means in terms of execution. And I couldn't really be helpful there.
It's all right. Okay. How do you feel? Let me ask you this one. I mean, because you've been Barbie fans these questions that we know they're going to be difficult answers to, because we need to really process this stuff. Right. One of the lanes that I have to deal with right now is trying to mobilize and organize a grassroots community-based lobbying campaign for some police reform bills. Right. That, of course, some of our folks in the Democratic Party machine, particularly the major players within the Assembly and the Senate, are angrily pushing back on, and the governor only gives faint lip service to, right? But we still have, in spite of this lurch to the right that we're facing all over, we still have a Democratic governor, a Democratic Senate, and the Democratic Assembly. How do you think we'll fare? Let's say within the next 2 years, and I'm using that for this legislative session. We got a new legislative session in. Or how do you think that that kind of effort would fare within that time frame?
Well, this is another one where I'm not trying to duck the question. I just can't claim expertise in this area in terms of legislative strategy. But, I will say, and I suspect you might agree, like just having Democrats in the legislature surely isn't enough. And, I don't know. I think, just to speak to general strategies, I think that in meeting with legislators, that you have to tell stories, right? You have to paint a picture. People have to feel like you have to appeal to their emotional and moral center, right? And in ways that they can't turn away, and then it's just got to be kind of a dogged commitment to keep after folks. The other thing is, I think sometimes reform efforts, when they stall out, it's obviously very frustrating. But what I've seen is that sometimes things change because of circumstances. Like there's something that happens that sort of opens up the vault, so to speak, on these issues. And so, how to sort of think strategically about how do you keep the pressure up in a way that makes the problem more apparent and helps people feel the issue more acutely. And I don't know what that is, but just to sort of look for opportunities to make it plain. Now the problem in the criminal justice space is that, we're dealing with people's lives. We're dealing with, forms of oppression in Black communities. And so it's hard to know how what I'm saying would play out, because obviously you don't, we want people to be safe. So
thank you for that.
You're asking me all the hard questions. I just don't have answers to them.
That's all right.
But that's okay, right? Like, because even the way that you go through it is always helpful. And that kind of leads us into the next part, what I wanted to ask you about. You run Rutgers has an institute for the study of global racial justice that you run. So what is the Institute for Global Racial Justice? And because when you were talking about reparations, you were talking about different strategies. I'm like, oh, this is really all great lineup.
I'm like, oh, I'm gonna recruit you for our next tribunal.
for what happened? So what is the Institute for Global Racial Justice?
So let me first of all, just a quick clarification. Real talk. If I would have preferred the title Institute for Global Racial Justice, but it's actually the Institute for the Study of the Study of Global Racial Justice. It's an academic institute that was formed through a large grant that the university received. basically to connect all three of the campuses. So I run the Rutgers Newark campus. There are directors in New Brunswick and Camden as well. And essentially what it does is it brings together scholars from across the university who work in all different areas who provides them with support, provides them maybe with financial support, connects them to other people in the university who are working on similar issues. So it was really intended to be a corridor for those kinds of academic exchanges. At Rutgers Newark, our Chancellor Cantor, is very focused on community engaged work, and not in a predatory way, but in a holistic, ideally helpful way. And so, Rutgers Newark has kind of a different character, I shouldn't say different character. It has a different vibe, let's just say, than some of than the New Brunswick campus. I think the faculty here are tend to be more sort of justice centered. Anyway, so it's really more of a academic enterprise, I guess, is the bottom line answer to your question. And it is global in the sense that we do have people who are working on issues in different parts of the world. We've got some, one of my co-directors is in Abu Dhabi. We've got some of the people we've brought in for postdoctoral fellowships who are doing work on police violence in Nicaragua. We've got another postdoctoral person who was working on education issues in South Africa. So it is truly global.
Oh, that's interesting. What have you? What do we gain from a global perspective of dealing with these issues?
That's a really great question. It's interesting. So the person I just mentioned, who is about to get her PhD and is doing her dissertation on issues of trauma, with issues that Black youth in particular in the school systems in South Africa face, and how those school systems negotiate the issues of trauma. And it's, I just reviewed a draft of one of her chapters in her dissertation, and there was so much there that is similar to issues of public education in the United States, and the way that she was actually critiquing the way that this particular school dealt with issues of trauma in South Africa, because there was this sort of the critique that she was leveling was that the frame that the schools would try to impose is too harsh a word, but I can't think of the right word just now. It was very individual centered. It's like, okay, let's help you heal your trauma. And her point is that, that there's a lot of collective trauma, and the idea of healing and individual healing is too individually focused, that there actually, should be broader conversations about how to realize justice, collective justice. And it's so anyway, that's just one example. But the larger point is just that, when we think about anti-Blackness, that's global. So, there are a lot of lessons and strategies that can, be used across our different geographic contexts, and that can be cross-fertilized. And sometimes that's harmful, actually, because what we also find is that countries around the world pick up on some of the bad stuff that the United States does too. So anyway, it's been eye-opening for me. Jonathan, I can't.
When you said that, so when you said that anti-Blackness is global, right? Can you elaborate on what is meant by that, and what is, because many people don't really look at it that way. Many people don't really see. Well, they have either a U.S. perspective, or they might not see it in Nicaragua, or they might like. What is it? What do you mean by it's global, and what can we learn from the concept of anti-Blackness being global? Like, how did that? Like, what does that even mean? How do we unpack that?
Wow. So that's
Sorry. Yeah,
that okay. You know, I mean, it's a great question. Not sure that um I can fully answer it in a
because you
way
said
that it deserves.
anti-Blackness is global, and you just
But
moved.
anti-black, what
It's
I
as
have in
global
mind,
as whiteness.
it is, well, yeah, I mean, so we see examples of anti-blackness. So, this um, fear and loathing of Black people that manifests in policies that systemically disadvantage and oppress Black people wherever they are. Here's a very recent example. Look at what's happening in Ukraine, right? Where you have
Yeah.
people who are trying to get out of the country. They're not letting African, people who have immigrated from Africa out of Ukraine. They're turning them away from, when they're trying to get on trains. I've seen videos of this, at least, where they're trying to get out and they're being told that they can't leave. So this it's the problems that we see in the U.S. Are not unique to the United States. They may manifest differently in France and in Britain, in other parts of the world. But the core is about practices of subordination and degradation, isolation. They're very similar. It plays out in very similar ways if you look at the way Black populations are isolated and segregated in certain parts of the world. Um, that's yeah. That's I don't know that I can go much deeper than. You're still muted.
I always mute myself between. Always forget myself to unmute. Coming out. No, that answer was fine, right? Like, and again, as always, it's stuff that I can learn from, right? Like, and stuff for further study. So, in the institute, what are you most proud of, or one of the things that highlights right now that's being worked on that you're just like, wow, this is some really great stuff. It's pretty groundbreaking. It's something that it's something that everyone should know about.
Well, the thing that I've been working on for the last 5 years, I think we may have even had a conversation about this earlier at some point, Jonathan, if I'm remembering correctly, is the issue of school segregation in New Jersey. I, as we've talked about, I was a civil rights lawyer for a number of years. And I have to say, before I became a civil rights lawyer, I wasn't really focused on the issue of segregation. I thought, oh, that's kind of an old idea. What does that even mean in this modern context? What I've come to appreciate and understand and can't let go of now, just based on the mountains of research that I've read, the books I've read, that that segregation is the epicenter of racial injustice. It radiates in so many different ways. Well, radiate is a positive word. It just spreads in so many different ways. It spreads through our policing system, our public health, environmental justice, public schooling. And the thing that I came to learn, it's sort of a long story, but back in 2004, when I was actually a practicing lawyer at the Legal Defense Fund, and I was down in Delaware doing some event on the anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, and I was talking about how schools all over the country were resegregating, and there was someone in the audience who was actually from New Jersey, and he came up to me afterwards and he said, we've got a lot of segregation in New Jersey. And I had no idea what he was talking about. And I've since come to learn that we have literally like several 100,000 Black and Latino children who are in intensely isolated schools, as well as what is it? White students spread over 61 schools and 46 districts or something like that, where they're 90, it's where the schools are 90% white. So we've got isolation among Black and Latino students as well as white students, different consequences for sure. And so there is a lawsuit that I helped to facilitate. I'm not litigating the case. It was filed 4 years ago. We just had a hearing in the case yesterday. But the lawsuit isn't, I'm proud of the fact that I helped to facilitate the lawsuit. But the thing that I'm actually proudest of is that I've worked for a really long time to try to bring folks into the conversation. So, we have organizational plaintiffs who are the state NAACP, the Latino Action Network, the Urban League of Essex County. We've got, faith groups. We've got, or a faith group. We've got, individual plaintiffs. But then beyond that, I've been doing presentations in many parts of the state. People ask me to come and speak about the issue. League of Women Voters, interfaith groups, students, superintendents. I had an hour-long conversation with a superintendent the other day, and the issue is that we have, in New Jersey, we've got this tremendous these funding cases, the Abbott line of cases, which we now know actually the state is not funding public schools the way that they're supposed to under Abbott. There is a report released by Education Law Center just yesterday. And then we also have, I think there's an important question about what we lose when children don't come to, when they don't learn together. I think segregation fosters prejudice by white students, certainly. But also when you come together and you get to know people from different backgrounds. I think about my college experience, right? I grew up in Texas. I didn't really know that much about the Northeast, and coming to learn from students who had different educational experiences, different life experiences. It wasn't always easy, for sure, but it broadened my horizon. So anyway, so that's
and we have to.
You muted yourself again, Jonathan. I want you to know that Kalina Berman, who's with the Abbott Legal Institute, is listening and paying attention. And Abbott ALI has been really important on this front for a long time. Go ahead, Jonathan. I'm sorry, you were muted. I just covering down on you.
Oh no, that was good. But one of the things that when we talked about this before, one of the things that I think we brought up, because I remember it was a really good conversation, and we definitely have to have that conversation again, is if you look at like Columbia South Orange, like South Orange Maplewood, the Columbia High School, or Montclair, you have integrated high schools but segregated within, right? And there were cases, there have been a series of news reports and studies that the honors classes, the AP classes,
tracking,
and the other, right? So even in the same school, there is segregation, and especially given what happened in the South when desegregation happened. They fired all the Black teachers, right? And you had Black people being taught by teachers who hated them. And so all of those things like get thrown up within this debate too, right? Like how do you deal with does anti-Blackness go away when you are integrated, or does it just take on a different form and you have the same issues of inequality, but just in an quote integrated way?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I accept everything that you said. I think you're absolutely right. The problem with anti-Blackness is that it replicates itself, right? It always tries to find a way. The only thing I'll say about that is that in the South, one of the things that the courts did, the seminal Brown was the seminal decision, but the decision that really moved the needle was another case out of Virginia. And what they said is, you've got to not just desegregate in terms of removing the legal barrier, you've got to integrate your faculty, you've got to integrate your facilities, you've got to integrate extracurricular activities, transportation. That case came in 1968. And so we lost a lot when those 39,000 Black teachers were fired. That's not, in my view, that's not what this is about. Like, we have an opportunity here to reimagine, in my view, what public education could be in a way that is holistic, and that puts up guardrails and alert systems. Because I'm very clear-eyed about the fact that that there have to be protective rules and policies that are in place. I'm working with some folks at the Dr. Charles Payne at the Cornwall Center, some other folks. We've come together. We're having a statewide education equity conference on June 11th. Listeners, take note, please, because we want massive participation. It's going to be virtual. And we're talking about these issues. I said to people, how would you do, like, we want an anti-racist, centered, justice-centered public education system. What does that look like? Dream a world. What are the policies that we would need? What are the practices that we would need? And then bring that knowledge and that information into the space if and when we have a chance to do something new in New Jersey.
Yeah, I think that these are very valuable discussions, especially given what's going on, like in Westfield, where they're like critical race theory. Why are we doing this?
Coming at Toni Morrison. An old money white town,
yeah.
right? They ain't got nothing better to do. Oh my God.
And so I know we're running out of time. And just very, very briefly, how do you imagine this level of intransigence that we see now going with the spirit of what you're talking about?
So there has to be, as I said, there have to be systems in place. You have to design, you have to imagine a different world, a different way of doing things, and then you have to design around it. I'm not saying it's all, apple pie and, whatever. It's not all success in certain respects is not guaranteed, but you have to be intentional. I just think that we could do a lot better in public education. And so I think the key, going back to the conversation we had earlier, is bringing stakeholders, parents, caregivers, guardians, students to the table, bringing, people, teachers, educators. We're working with the New Jersey Association of Black Educators, where I've been in conversation with them. The superintendents from high need districts, I'm doing a presentation with them next week. So we have to respect the fact that people have knowledge and understanding that's different, that has to be brought into the fold. And then we have to figure out what's the best world that we can imagine. And it'll have to be, it'll have to be tweaked, and, course corrections will be required and all that. But I think we can get to a better place.
Because the questions are important. The questions are even more important often than the answers, right? Like, because the questions can generate lots of different possibilities. So,
That's right.
So I absolutely appreciate that. And speaking of like the questions, and the last question, and a reference to a common song, we always ask everyone the same question at the very end, right? The last question we ask: who is your favorite hip hop artist, individual or group? Or just the person you're rocking with now?
It's your first time.
Yes, this is your first time on here.
Because I'm old school. Well, it's because I'm old and old school. I'm just
gonna have not to say old.
Well, I'm a little bit old, but I'll say Eric B and Rakim.
All right.
Don't sweat the technique.
Our DJ would very much approve. Okay,
I'm glad I passed that test.
It's
a lot of pressure.
Fair. But you are not old at all. You are wise, but not old. So I appreciate you. Appreciate the answer. Appreciate you coming on It's always, 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 always.
We need to
wonderful.
stick a pin in that June 11th presentation. And
Yes,
who we can bring in to help do our own discussion around that. Heard you clearly, Professor. We heard you clearly.
that please.
All right.
And there'll be a series of conferences, by the way. We're planning
Right
a
on.
series of
Okay.
conferences. Yeah.
Oh, excellent, excellent, and definitely the connection with Zaid always, because I think that's great. I was not exaggerating when I said that he is one of the most prolific, thoughtful activists who does a lot of the work that unsung. Like I'm singing his
He
praises,
lied.
but a lot of the stuff is unsung. He's gone through a lot, done a lot, and so I say it at every turn, right? So I think that. That conversation is important to have as well. So
Yeah,
thank you so much.
much
Great show.
respect, and I'd love to talk to you, Zaid, as maybe we could connect.
Oh
but
yeah, we'd love to. We'd love to. By the way, I'm on in 1983. I got put on a waiting list for Rutgers Law School, and I'm still waiting.
Okay, they're lost. Let me tell you.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Jonathan, it was great to see you. Thank you so much for having
Great
me.
to have you.
Great
Great
seeing
to have
you,
you.
and great having you.
you.
Take
Take
good care. Okay, bye-bye.
All right, so thank you. That was great. We are getting ready to have our next guest come on soon, and because Newark did get some funding for anti-violence programs, but between that and time she gets here, like Zaid, do you want to give us? So here's the thing: during Biden's State of the Union speech, and I want your reaction to this, Zaid.
I didn't get a chance to see all of Joe Biden's talk, but I got the end of it.
Well, I mean, but one thing he said, he was like, don't defund the police, fund the police. But right before he did that, he said, we need to fund lots of anti-violence programs, right? Yeah. So he started listing a lot of programs that would be, quote, defund programs. But then he said loud and clear so everyone could hear.
Let me tell you something. Newark, New Jersey, I want you to be proud of. I want Newark, New Jersey to be proud because not only did he say that, but we had players who were on the streets of Newark on a regular basis doing this work who were at the White House having these conversations with Joe Biden.
All right, talk to me again.
I'm gonna let. I don't want to go into it too much because I'd rather Keesha bring that out.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
And I'll use the Newark Anti-Violence Coalition as a metaphor, right? We started shutting down streets around the question of gun violence and community violence. 155 straight weeks we started back in 2009, right? So what we're talking about now, what we're seeing is the beginning of the recognition in governmental circles of the need to actually put resources behind people who have been doing incredibly selfless and sometimes dangerous work in the interest of peace in the streets, who have proven to be able to connect with their own community in ways that the police simply cannot and have not, right? And that it takes more than just the police to address this whole question of crime and violence in our communities. That's just beginning. And this 2009 is what, 13 years ago, right? And so we're just beginning to see the realization of that in some official circles. Now, having said that, and I know those of us who, especially the younger, those of us who are younger in this, are quite excited about the fact that they can actually now function in a professional /professional way for stuff they have been doing for free and in a very difficult way for a long time, that they can now have some recognition, some formal, respect and support in what they're doing. But I say that with guarded optimism, because just as we are getting there, we are also getting there in a political climate that would like to take this thing and take all that money away and give it to the police, and give it to the police without any semblance of police reform or legal reform, and just go back to the us and them. Y'all bust them up, shoot them down, whatever you got to do. You get them to the courts. We'll put the laws into place to lock them up for a long time. That's what we're trying to come out of. But those other forces, right? all those forces that's, your friends from the white riot of January 6th, they're waiting, they're using their access to state control to gut voting rights. They're the ones doing that. And they don't want to just gut voting rights. They want to gut voting rights so they can come back and do these kinds of things to prevent meaningful change from happening from within our communities, because they don't necessarily want it. They are happy with and are willing to do all kinds of things legally and extra legally to preserve the ugliness of white supremacy, right? So just as we're getting on this track, I tell those same young folks, don't get comfortable, because you know what? You're going to also need to be in the streets to out-organize the right wing at the ballot box. And the further south you go, south of New York City, the more time you're going to put in the streets on this front. So we're excited about what's happening in Newark. Newark is is not just in those conversations. Newark is in the front of those conversations because we've been at it so hard, been at it so long, and we have leadership that is in front of it. Raz started the shutdown on the streets. Then South Ward County. Then we ultimately took City Hall with him and for him, so we can build these kind of things out. So that is just really beginning to gel in a way that has already reduced some of the violence that drives all of us crazy, right? That we've reduced that some 50%, right? Other cities are looking at us as to how they can do that, because some of other cities with black leadership and black majorities are really struggling with this whole question and where to go and how to do it. We should be proud for all of its limitations. There's no magic bullets in this, and I hate to even use that language, because bullets mean so much to us and what we're dealing with in this violence, right? But for all of its limitations, we have broken some serious ground on this here in Newark, and we need to those folks who kind of who just kind of looking at it like need to not just look at it and become a part of it, because this is the kind of strategies that we're talking about. We're talking about, in the end, putting the community at the center of public safety. So community has to step up. Community has to be engaged. Community has to be around. These young folks who are out here trying to do this work, these folks coming home who want to be on the other side of the question, who are now doing this work. Community needs to be supportive of that, and the community needs to be our advocates, also advocate with us for those things that we need.
Because what you're saying is, if the community is not involved, then there are pressures on one side, there are pressures on the other. Like right before he said, "Don't defund the police, fund the police," he started talking about these anti-violence programs, right? Yeah. So it seems like he's like, "Hey, anti-violence programs need to be funded. They work. We know they work in communities." And then he was like, "Don't defund the police, fund the police." How do you put those two things together, Zay?
Well, that's the question for him. How did he put that together? I don't, that.
What do you make? What do you think? What does that mean to you?
No, well, let's look at what it means to Newark, right? Newark uses a different language, right? The language defund the police scares the hell out of a whole lot of folks, including folks in our community, right? I don't have a problem with it personally, because I know where that's coming from and where that's going, and I'm with that, right? Personally, right? But it scares the hell out of folks who just don't really know how to see beyond what they've seen already. So the language that we've used in Newark is not defund the police, but refund the community, right? That the community needs some support over here, and where there are places where we can move some money around, right? Particularly in those places that where there's some excess funding for there's never been a shortage of funding for the police. Just like there's never been a shortage of funding for the military
or prisons.
There's never been shortage. They've always had.
No one ever said, "Oh, we can't afford to build this prison."
Yeah, that's right. There's never been a shortage for that, right? But where folks are over incarcerated and over policed, there are spaces where some of those monies can be put to something else to help address the larger question, right? And with only 5%, this is before we got this funding from the state, right? Only with 5% of funding from the police department, we began to do some really serious stuff. Newark Community Street thing, this Office of Violence Prevention that when Keesha gets on, that she'll talk about, that has this role in really helping steward the functionality of these new entities that we're putting together. Our Brick City Peace Collective, which is now a collection of organizations doing this work in town, in a way that the Newark Anti-Violence Coalition had been beckoning for, over these years. These things are in place, right? Some spaces that had been out there before we got there, like my little brother Al Tariq, who has the hub, Al Tariq Best, right? Those spaces are building out and are getting the kind of support that they need and are doing good work, right? You can go into other communities around the country trying to figure this thing out, and you say the Newark Community Street team, they'll know what you're talking about, right? They'll know they've helped us train some of our folks who are trying to learn how to do this. So our folks here in Newark, all of our struggles, right, are on the right track, doing some groundbreaking things. And if we're allowed to stay on track, it can really be meaningful. It can really be something meaningful that's really important to where we want to go with this city. And then, I shout out my little brother, our beloved Mayor Ras Baraka, for that in so many respects. One of the things that is also happening with our town that we need to appreciate, right? The Newark is coming out from under that old shadow of ultimate, being the ultimate space for violence and crime that had been put on it in the aftermath of the epic Newark Rebellion. Most folks don't think of the Newark Rebellion the way we do, as being the catalyst for Black Power organizing and a real push for the expansion of our presence in the electoral arena. Most folks don't think of Newark like that around the country. They think that's when Newark went down. No, that's really when Newark began to break out of being held down by white supremacy, right? So now we're finally beginning to shed the residual baggage of having been held down by white supremacy, and folks are looking at Newark as a place to come, as a place to visit, as a place to work, as a place to live, as a place to invest, right? Newark has been starting to get different looks, healthy looks that you want any city that you live in to have. And the question of what we've been doing around these violence reduction strategies has been key to that.
And I think that's real interesting in terms of just just the conversation. And I know that we love Keesha. We know that there are always things that she is pressed to do on any given day, in terms of just like, something has to come up that she has to deal with, that deals with violence and deals with some very, very difficult things within the city. I like the way you started talking about that in terms of what these violence reduction programs means, and also more specifically on rhetoric, on the what does defund the police mean, and what has the rhetoric that Newark has used and not used. And you said that with only 5% taken away from the police budget, Newark was able to do really positive things. What are some like what does that mean when it comes to a lot of these conversations? Because a lot of people are like, defund the police mean have no police, or means abolish the police, or means take away the police won't have jobs, right? Like, or whatever, right? Like there'll be no police doing anything. And you're like, it was 5% that was taken away from a budget that in many areas is the most robust budget in the entire of municipalities. but Newark was able to do, you said, a lot of serious work with that. What does that mean for this larger conversation?
Well, listen, the biggest place where that was illustrated, was gotten the most, the largest look, if you will, was in the aftermath of the George Floyd protest, right? We've had our own protests, right? And we had a big protest, and I was just coming out of COVID too. It was a mess. I was weak as a dog, right? And had to get back out there, right? We had a big protest that the People's Organization for Progress called, right? But we knew we were going to get a big presence, but I don't think any of us anticipated, that we would get as large a presence that we did. We did, right? But not only did we get a large presence and have one of our largest protests in the history of this town, but there was a segment of protesters who were not from Newark, New Jersey, by the way, right? Who broke away from the focal point of the protest and the rally that took place afterwards, rolled over to the first precinct where where hell broke loose back in July '67, and wanted to start some stuff, right? The forces that we already had in the street doing violence interruption work were on the ground on that day and were able to get over there and be on hand when that happened. And it was those forces that stopped some very provocative behavior from happening. And the police understood that that was their role and their space to do that. And they stood back and let our folks work and do their thing, right? So community in the street, right?
But Zaid,
community in the center of a conversation, but community in the street actually intervened, right, with the police in a background support role, right? Prevented something from happening that the community did not want to happen, and that shouldn't have happened anyway, right?
Now, Zaid, on that, right, on that particular subject, I never hear about that talked about nationally. That's only talked about in Newark. We talk about it in the show. We talk about it on our guests. But it's probably one of the most thoughtful things that happened in the country involving policing, defund police, anti-violence programs, right? And especially given what was going on in cities all over the country, and it's not even brought up by Democrats, right? Democrats don't bring it up. Republicans are like, we need more police because that's the only way to stop violence, right? But where you actually have effective anti-violence programs that were actually put to the test, no one's talking about it. Why?
I don't know that. No, I think people are talking about it. It's not getting the coverage that it should, right? What I'm talking about got New York Times coverage. We need to be clear about that, right? So, and that created a conversation in circles of our folks in official places that need help. There's a young brother that was just elected to, I believe, Rochester, Mayor Rochester. First thing he said before he even took office is that I want to look at what they're doing in Newark to bring our crime down, because we need help, and this paradigm that we've been using ain't been working. Ain't been working. Now his interest in what we're doing is not a national story the way it should be, but his eyes are open and he sees that, and he's engaged our folks who are running our city under our mayor, right? We are I have a work relationship with Equal Justice USA, and Equal Justice helps, these organizations in their, develop their professional capacity to handle now being recipients of resources, managing those resources so they can move forward in their work. We have a program called Trauma to Trust, right? Where police officers are trained in trauma with the community. And in a part of that training is them having to face the place of police as an institution being a part of our people's historical trauma. It's something that they got to own, right? If they're going to police our community and be community sensitive, right? They got to be able to handle that, right? Other communities are looking at that. We have a relationship with the city of Baton Rouge, right? Who's very interested in that. Baton Rouge, Louisiana, right? We were talking today about another city in North Carolina. So that our folks are being, what we're doing is genuinely being looked at. And it's part of our responsibility also. Let me just, and we're in this. This is a media, and this is a media discussion we're having right now. We're radio. This is media, right? It's part of our responsibility to not just support our folks who are doing that, but we need to also create spaces for those stories to be told, right? To be meaningfully and healthily told and amplified in ways so that they begin to get the kind of attention that they should, so we can, have a consistent flow of support and resources, so we can have an enduring impact on this question, and ultimately actually change the character of our communities. In the end, it's about transformation of the society that we live in. We want to live better.
Now, this is one of those questions also that I always appreciated. I don't know if people talk about it as much, right? When we talk about, we want communities that have less violence. We want to lower that violence. You mentioned something about it's about transforming the community. Are you saying that in order to decrease violence, it is the community that has to embrace these changes? Like what? Like what do you mean?
Part, absolutely. Absolutely.
So break down what you mean by that. Like what are these things that within the community? Because some people be like, "Oh, you're just blaming the community again for these things, right? This is white supremacy. It's systemic. Why are you saying the community is the problem, right?" Like some people might hear it that way. So what does that mean that this is about transforming the community, and the community has to change in order to get the results that we want?
The great Mary Baraka told us that the fight is for self-determination and democracy. Right. Right. And we have to be bold enough to embrace both principles in this. Right. We want our communities to be a certain way. We're willing to stand up and organize to fight for the resources that, by virtue of our numbers and presence in this larger system that we should be entitled to, we have to organize and fight for them. Right. We'd have to do that. Right. Regardless of what program or resource pot that we're fighting for, we got to do that. And if we fail to do that, folks who don't want us to have nothing are organized and will do what they do to keep things in place so that we don't have transformation, so that things stay a certain way. And we keep these pipelines to prison and whatnot, and mass incarceration, as opposed to being space with, being that village, that our ancestors always talked about, us recreating our communities as those villages, those village environments that we need to have. So yeah, I mean, that's the most basic way to put it, right? And then, in the end, and also, we're actually in this, right? Folks who have been in situations where they've, been on the other side of this, done some violence, done some time, right? It is out of their ranks that we're bringing folks home to do something else, to be a part of their own healing, to be a part of their community healing, by being the credible messages in the streets that catches some of our young heads, just as we're about to get into something that we don't need to be getting into in the name of trying to create a rep for ourselves. Y'all know how this madness go in the streets, right? Right? Folks on the streets are going to listen to somebody who's been in the streets. Right? So from that level at the very bottom, working up to the broader question of being socially and politically engaged on what it is that you want for your community. How bad do you want it? It has never been enough in the fight for democracy and justice and self-determination to just vote for somebody every 4 years. right? And our ancestors in the fight for the ballot understood that. They were all actively engaged in all those spaces that they were trying to transform. There's a beautiful special that PBS is doing right now that's on demand on the great Fannie Lou Hamer. And they could have gone further with Fannie Lou, because Fannie Lou was far deeper than she's given credit for in the, the outer layers of her appreciation. But, Fannie Lou Hamer, in the fight for democracy, was a part of creating those spaces that they were trying to transform, fighting against a violent Jim Crow segregation order, right? So, thankfully, because we've had Fannie Lou Hamers, right? If we stay active or get active as we need to be, we should not lose as much ground, right? In this particular time, as folks are trying to take things away from us, right? We should not lose that kind of ground and have to fight that all over again, because, baby, that was a rough fight that cost us a lot of lives, a lot of blood. Listen, we haven't talked about them today, but I don't go anywhere without talking about my comrades who've been in prison since the late 1960s. Some dues have been paid for this transformation and for this society that we want, right? So, so the more we do, the better we'll do.
Wow. So that's
I've been trying to. At the same time, we've been doing all this, this dialogue. I haven't heard from her. I haven't heard from my daughter.
Right. Fair.
She can get on here.
Right. Fair enough. But you were very excited about this segment. You were like, this is so important. And I definitely wanted to link it to, what's the to the speech and to see what those dichotomies are. I'm glad that we had a chance to start to go through that. But what is it like? We can definitely go more in depth with Keesha. But what is this funding? Is it federal funding? What is this thing? What is this program? What can you tell us about it?
Well, Joe Biden is pushing for the federal funding. We've got some folks, even within the ranks of the so-called Democratic Party who have gotten in the way of some of this, right? In Jersey, we got this guy, Josh Gottheimer. We've rallied on his behind several times, right? In the Senate, you got the Mansions and the, what's the woman's name in Arizona, right? They've gotten away, right? They have got in the way of that, there is motion in spite of this clogged, political atmosphere nationally, right? There is state money. Governor Murphy has made some state money available, right? And some of that is beginning to move, right? And I told you what our mayor did with only 5% of the city's budget. I mean, only 5%, I'm sorry, of the police's budget out of the city. What he was able to accomplish, what we were able to accomplish with that, speaks volumes for where this thing could go if we give it a chance. Give it a chance. See, there's always been that big question that's been a cloud over our presence in the Americas, is that what would happen to white folks if we gave black folks a real chance to just be themselves and to be somebody? There's so much anxiety around their diseased notions of white supremacy, right? That basic normal human development is something that folks can't even talk about.
And you're saying,
right? And we have to fix that. Unfortunately, that lift is going to be on us, because all of that weight of what they've been putting down on us is what's weighing us down.
So you're like, even just talking about human development, right? Like talking about human development in ways other than incarceration is difficult to do, even though there's a lot of headway. You're like, there's some state money, there's federal, like people are seeing this, right? But you're saying that there are a lot of these roadblocks because you're saying people can't conceive of give more money to invest in people and that reduces crime. They're locked into, I need to incarcerate more and that reduces crime. Is that really what you're saying?
White supremacy make you crazy as hell. White supremacy is not rational, right? White supremacy, especially in its violence, It's most irrational, right? Irrational, right? It's some crazy stuff, But in the end, that's what we're looking at. There was nothing sane. Let's look at January 6th. Just look at that. That was some crazy. That was some crazy stuff, right? Over one guy losing an election. Are you serious? Is racism that embedded in this country where at least half of its white population was willing to overthrow its government around one dude who talks this crazy stuff and thinks he's all right with doing it because he got some money on top of being white and racist and wrong. So we can't have illusions about this. I'll take the long one, but we can build. I'm glad Donna's jumping in too, because one of the things that just building on Professor Boddie's presentation, what is she working on? School segregation in New Jersey, not in Alabama. New Jersey. New Jersey is the 5th most segregated school system in the country.
And I love the way that I love the way that Professor Boddie talked about just the way in which that works, even if schools are, quote, integrated, right? Like that the schools that have lots of kids of different races, but when you look at the educational outcomes, when you look at
they're being
the
fostered
classes
within an integrated system, is itself can be segregated, and they call that system track. I went through that when I was in high. I went to an integrated school when I went to high school in Roselle. And me and Bob grew up in the same. We went to the same school system and whatnot. And the best classes were overwhelmingly majority white. Those honors classes, those college bound classes, right? The school in the town was 50% white and black, but it didn't play out like that. So I know what tracking looked like. And it's oldest, it is. I love that how she described it, that racism has a way of morphing. She almost described it like a virus, like COVID, right? Morphing into these different forms and whatnot to resist being vaccination, right? Being immunized and all that. I love how she described it like that, because that in the end is what has happened, right? And how she has developed the whole question of redlining and how that has played out throughout the country in a post-reconstruction as a part of a segregated national order, not a segregated South, a segregated national order that systematically ensures that the overwhelming majority of this country's descendants of its slaves ain't gonna do well financially. And there's a place for them necessarily, that we have low-paying jobs in prison.
And while I missed the first segment, I know Jonathan, as an educator, have we had the time now to reflect on New Orleans, that post Katrina, how it pretty much, if not, I believe it shut down the public school system, and after Katrina, everything became a charter school. And now that we're X amount of years after Katrina, have we looked at the effect on that and how that's played out?
That's a heavy question. Madam.
Okay.
You should take a stab at that, because that's an educational question first. That's your frontier.
Well, I don't. I have not looked at it, right. I know that it's complicated right now, because there are a lot of different, because it was a charterized districts. They're effectively were effectively all public schools. I have a good friend who's actually opening up a charter school, who is there trying to do a lot of really good work there. I think that it becomes real interesting just to see how these things are tracked, right? Like there were some schools that had that were kind of segregated, right? Like, as in, when we talked about school segregation, there were like the few charters that, or seemingly the few charters that the white kids went to, and then everybody went to everyone else, right? Like some had to have a lottery, others, the ones that were most segregated, did not, or there was some levels of that. So I think that it's complicated. I think it should be studied, but I think that it should be studied with the respect of, well, what did we get from decentralizing democratic accountability? Is there democratic accountability? Is it a bunch of private institutions that are publicly funded? Because ultimately, I think that when you're dealing with this whole charter public school dichotomy, it ultimately is about how does funding, like, is it a democratic process or not, right? Is democracy important or is it not? If it's not important, then you probably have no problem with like the charter process. But I think that with privatizing public services, there's always a fear that the worst excesses of capitalism, like lying, false advertising, right? Like doing all sorts of things just to make the money, right? Not really caring about the public good overall, because right now in Newark, 1/3 of all money goes to charter schools. That's not sustainable, right? Like, as in, there are budget issues that will come up, that inevitably come up when you have 1/3 of a budget going to charter schools. That if and many people are like, hey, there doesn't need to be a moratorium. We just need to expand. We need to expand more. And there were many people in Newark calling to say, like, hey, let's just stop and study, right? So to really answer your question directly, I do not know, like, the credible studies that have been done that look at the impact on this. And even when you get into studies, when you get to charter schools, you have to really like do a lot of due diligence, right? Like, because the big thing that was going on with both charter schools and education reform was value-added teaching, right? Like, there was this thing that they would put on teachers that you'd calculate their score, you put it in a formula. The formula couldn't be explained, right? When I read the actual document for it, was written by economists, it was incomprehensible, right? Like, and incomprehensible from a just common sense point of view, because they couldn't answer common sense questions. Like, well, what if your kid was on the debate team and a lot of kids from this class were on the debate team? That might impact their scores. What about active parents? What about all the things that go on outside of those 40 minutes? How do you evaluate a kid on a standardized test that is not necessarily aligned with curriculum to a teacher in that way? And I don't know how that happens. I don't know how you do that.
And then the other question, Jonathan, the statement that the money follows the child. So when the child leaves a Newark public school and goes to the charter school, and the money goes with the child, if that child goes back to the public school, does the money go back? I just, all these things I wonder. And does it really follow the child? So is it actually like an envelope going, okay, you're leaving, you're going back over here, here's your envelope of money?
And how does that even work? And how does that even work when you're talking about expenses that are aggregate, right? Not individual. How do you do that when you have to secure a whole school or buy, like, certain things for a whole school, whether or not, like what that's one of those things that actually tries to say, well, if you can't afford it, then shut the schools down. That's the answer, right? Like, they just left the schools, shut the schools down. But charter schools don't serve all the kids in the community. That many charter schools blatantly say we're not for all kids, right? They will blatantly tell you that as they send kids who are lower performing, behavioral problems, behavioral special needs, they will send them out. Parents like it because like a lot of parents, I think they don't want to send their kids with those kids. And I think some of the same things that play out in segregation that the professor was talking about in the last segment, right, when she was talking about what she did with schools, is the same logic that plays with charter schools. We don't see it because of race, right? Because there are a lot of Black kids who go to charter schools, but there are a lot of parents who are like, I don't want my kid to go to school with those other kids. And that's part of it as well.
And that's the problem right there, right? That you've got those parents who are actually segregating their children away from other kids in the city of Newark or other cities like that. Well, Baltimore, New Orleans, all of that. So when you start talking about that level of segregation, we've got to talk that from a Black perspective, because Black people, will say, oh, I don't want my kids to go to that school because those kids are too violent, one, or those kids are not interested in learning. So all of those issues may be true, but it goes back to some of the things Zaid was talking about, right? Though that level of systemic racism, right? All of that plays a part, and then the historical factors that the mayor talks about when he come on, when he talks about we've never been given any psychological help coming up out of freedom. So that's coming up out of slavery. So that's been continual with Black folk, that level of mental illness, and we looked at people like Keesha to solve those problems.
Right, and so I said that was a perfect segue into Director Keesha Eure coming on, and thank
that lady in red
for being with us. We love you. We appreciate you. You do brilliant work. I know that Zaid has been talking about this for a while, right? Like, you got to get Keesha on to talk about this grant, this anti-violence grant. You've got to get her on talking about this. And we talked about what Joe Biden said right before he said, don't defund the police, fund the police, where he was talking about, like, he said, like, we need to fund anti-violence programs or something along those lines. That was like, and then he was like, don't defund the police, fund the police. Like,
But he did say fund child. He said fund child care or fund something to child or something around the children.
A series of things to fund. It's a series of things to fund that seem to be,
he was
like,
trying to say a lot of stuff. Joe getting
but
old.
then said that. But Keesha,
yes,
or Director Eure.
Yeah, I love when they call her that too. Director Eure. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
That sounds like kind of NCI. That sounds kind of NCIS-ish. Director Eure. Yeah, I like that.
So you talked about this. Well, Zaid has talked about this grant for anti-violence programs. Can you tell us about this, and what does this mean for Newark?
So thank you for having me. All politics is local. So we're talking about an investment into public safety. That's the conversation. And so we are investing in community-based public safety initiatives where for a long time there hasn't been an investment. So the city of Newark has put out a $1 million RFP for violence prevention and intervention programs to be able to help us to do the work in the city for community-based organizations. So we are investing in community-based organizations to continue to do the work they've been doing, mentorship, recreational, social, but high intervention kind of work as well, conflict resolution, mediations, the safe passage work. So just different types of things that we need in order to be able to intervene, prevent, and treat violence and crime in our city. So the city is also going to do a $19 million investment into the work, which will be multi-year funding for organizations to be able to apply for. This first one, which was the $1 million, is for 1 year, but the multi-year one is more appropriate for what we need because a lot of community-based organizations, institutions don't have enough funding. And so they are constantly competing year after year to try to get funding, but this is a multi-year. The state did a RFP as well for $10 million statewide for violence prevention and intervention programs. And 25 organizations was awarded. And out of the 25, 8 of them came from the city of Newark. And so we're showing that this work is so important locally, statewide, and also federally. And so like you talked about, Joe Biden and the administration is also putting together a $5 billion investment, which is coming out, and we are, working to organize around that. There's several collaboratives, collectives, fund peace organizations, different people nationally that's really coordinating and getting ready to build their infrastructure and capacity so that we can receive these fundings. And so while public safety and law enforcement has been invested in for years and years, this is one of the first times that we're really investing in public safety from a community-based perspective. And so the investment is great. In some perspectives, it's a drop in the bucket. We're using ARP dollars in a lot of cities, Chicago, Baltimore, Philadelphia. There's an investment where they're using the ARP dollars. And so it's just an investment because we know that crime and violence has increased exponentially in a lot of cities in the wake of COVID. But beyond COVID, we know that in Black and Brown communities who are the most affected and impacted, we need to do a better investment.
And you know what, Director Eure? After the State of the Union, several people gave responses, and a lot of people gave responses, particularly on Urban View on Sirius XM, around when, in the part Jonathan was talking about, when he was saying they're saying defund the police, and I'm saying fund the police, and he got a rise out of the crowd, and particularly Loree Favors from who's the director over at Medgar Evers. And she stated a couple of facts. You know, bringing more police has just never solved the problem of crime in a community. Period. You know, adding more police is not the answer. But she said, here is what's the answer. When you fund housing, you do get lower crime rates. When you fund education, you do get lower crime rates. When you fund homeless prevention programs, you do get so therein is the answer. We have to begin to define, you know, and I get it. And when we spoke to I forget the sister's name who comes on with the vote, and they said that when we said defund the police, it was purpose, that we wanted to shock and awe, but we have to go further to explain that.
Talk about Tamika?
Monifa.
She was with Rakia. Tell me, it was the other sister.
Monifa Bandali.
Yeah, Monifa. And when she said it was for shock and awe, but when we begin to understand, it's really not so much just defund, it's reappropriate. And if you could speak to that,
exactly right.
Right. Certainly. And so we know that across all the cities that law enforcement has the biggest budgets. And so we need, to work together with them or alongside them, because we know they can't do it alone and by themselves. And we don't expect for them to. And so they get to share their budget. They get to help fund some of the initiatives that's necessary in order to make cities safer and people safer. Because like you said, housing, employment, all of those things helps decrease crime and violence in the city. And so why not invest in those things? And if they have the budget, then we get to, reallocate some of that budget, to be able to do that. So it just makes sense. And it's not us against them, kind of a movement. It's a necessary. And so law enforcement get to have trials and errors and figure it out, but we don't get that grace. And so we want to create equity and change the culture and shift the culture around how community-based work is seen, how community-based public safety is seen, how the people who are closest to the issues are the people who are closest to solving them. And we have to give them opportunities to be able to do that. And we don't really do that.
Now, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you, Jonathan. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, one thing that I was thinking is that you said that there's $5 billion in federal money that will go toward anti-violence programs. That's like in the works. Like, can you tell us more about that? And that's a national thing, where
it's a national thing. It's a bill that's coming, and we're working to rally a lot of support around it. I know Mayor Baraka went to the White House to have conversations about it. There's Equal Justice USA, Akila Sherrills, and the Hobby, and all different, people who are really working to put some support around this work, to let them know why it's important, why this investment is important. And so, yes, while we know $5 billion is probably not enough, again, it's certainly a great start to be able to allocate for technical assistance and capacity building. And like you said, housing is huge in this work. And we know that we really need to be able to house people for safety, relocation, but also the prevention side of the work, and have treatment. Most of it is about mental health, right? We said we're treating violence as a public health issue.
Right.
What are the things and what are the root causes of the public health issues, mental and social and emotional health that goes unresolved and untreated? So, really making an investment to make sure people have access to mental health services, and those things that they need, quality of life issues, food, clothing, shelter, transportation, right, versus incarceration. And so we have to, peel back and not continue to incarcerate.
I think that's really where it is. I think that a lot of young people are really suffering, right? And a lot of them have real serious mental problems, right? And it's not just them. You think about what Mayor Baraka has said on the mayor's forum, as we begin to come out of COVID. Remember, he said no one is really going to know the psychological effects that this has had on these young people, right? And not just them, but think about parents who also, for the most part, most of us live in apartments,
Right.
Mhm.
right? And then if you got 4 or 5 people living in an apartment and people can't come outside, and you got people being violent with one another, and having certain types of psychological issues and not getting the help that they need, I mean, I think that is a major part of it. And so, like Tamika was saying this week, these folks know when they use that term defund the police, you can't say on one hand, let's fund the police, right? And then on the other hand, say no, they know that's not what we're talking about. They know we actually talking about shifting the budget, right? They know that. But what you hear black elected officials say, if you've got to explain that to these white folk who clearly know, they know you losing at the point you got to explain it to them, because they really know underneath it that they know that they've never paid black folks reparations. They know that when Mayor Baraka says that, there's no post-traumatic slave syndrome with us, they know exactly what the hell we're talking about, right?
Right.
So we just have to make the move that we need to make, and Keisha, that
And I think you went out.
Ed froze.
Yep.
uh,
Yeah, you froze for a second, Ed.
and so yeah, and so it's not a police issue. And so that's why I think that what you're doing, Keisha, and what Newark is doing, right, in and of itself is monumental.
And I think to add to that, and also just to ask you to even expound a little more on that, like Keisha, you're like, this isn't just a Newark thing anymore. This is now a part of federal policy, or will be a part of, or is striving to be a part of federal policy. What are some of the
Right.
things that, so you're saying that there have been meetings at the White House, there have been meetings with legislatures to try to push this? Like, this is a thing that is going on that is grassroots in nature, but rose to the federal level?
Certainly, because there's been more of a push towards it. So certainly in the wake of the George Floyd, when the city of Newark launched its Office of Violence Prevention and Trauma Recovery, where it was the rallying cry around the country of defunding the police. And certainly people didn't want to hear that, because we know that we function in a society where police have all reign authority and are seen, in a certain place. And so when they started to hear that, and people had demands around
Right.
defunding the police, refund the people, right? They had to kind of take a look at that. And you had some people in the White House, right? People were into governmental affairs and, things like that, who were saying, okay, we have to, do something different. And there has to be something different. And so they listened around what the needs are, where we talk about public safety is not just law enforcement.
Right.
Because when they respond to incidents, we're responding to incidents. When they're at the hospital, we're at the hospital, right? So they're not the only first responders. And because there was so much distrust among law enforcement, among police in a lot of cities, then community has had to take up some of that. And we know the community ultimately is what public safety needs, because we know what's happening in the communities. We know who the players are. We know how to intervene. We know how to stop things. We have information that the police don't have. And so the community gets to be at the center of this work. And so I think that they begin to listen. So the investment, and people were pushing for ARP dollars to be able to be spent, where they didn't see why or why that was important. But we certainly was able to show that in the wake of COVID, violence increased tremendously in cities at record numbers that we've never seen before. Some cities were able to keep theirs down. The city of Newark, we were able to stay around our same numbers. We didn't have a tremendous increase in terms of like murders and homicides, but there was an increase in crimes. But we certainly just showed that there was a need, and we have to address it. The same way y'all putting all these resources into COVID-19, it's the same way you got to put resources into this violence.
Yep.
Keesha, well, two things. One of the things I think you can credit to, Mayor Baraka really was hands-on. Mayor Baraka was on the radio every day. He was talking to the community. He was engaging, answering questions, and responding. So that was one reason that I'm sure you guys were able to stay off a lot of things or prevent. But I'm always concerned about University. University is a trauma hospital. It's the first point where there is particularly a shooting incident. When these awards went out, was University Hospital a part of these awards? And is there any help that's going to be given to them so you guys can meet them at the hospital and there can, that the interaction can happen immediately?
So University Hospital has a hospital-based violence intervention program. They do get funding already from the state. And so they are funded for hospital-based violence intervention, and they have a trauma recovery center. So they do get some funding. They weren't a part of this funding that came through Governor Murphy with this $10 million allocation. They weren't a part of that. But they certainly get other, types of dollars, and certainly, want to see them be funded and stay funded, because they are a level 1, a trauma 1 center. And they are the people who see a lot of them first, besides the police. And we know that a lot of them continue to come in and out the hospital. So the Newark Community Street Team is in the hospital as part of their violence intervention at the hospital. Also, Newark Community Solutions. And then they have other social workers, case managers, and people who follow up with people. So they are there at bedside to help at bedside all the way through to discharge of the patient when they come through for shootings, stabbings, assaults, so different injuries that they sustain. So the hospital does have a violence intervention program, and they are funded.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
And the thing is that we talk about this all the time, right? And I think that, it's not so much what we do on the back end, but it's really about what we do on the front end, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think about that even talking to my doctors, right? Where they, when my doctors say, "Oh, listen, man, if you do this, I'll give you an example. Kim and I had a conversation with our colonoscopy doctor, and Keesha, she said to us, said, I just to colon cancer. She told us, she said, colon cancer is preventable. Well, violence is preventable.
Go ahead.
If we're talking to
Mic drop.
some of these young brothers and sisters and find out what those issues are ahead of time, like when Mayor Baraka was running community schools, I remember Lauren telling us that when she would come on the show, Keesha, one of the things she would say is that one of the things that the mayor discovered when he was the principal, he said that just having conversations with some of the kids who were failing. And he said he found out that some of those kids who were failing We're not failing because they couldn't read or because they didn't want to participate. They were and couldn't see the goddamn board. And
Right.
what he found out was is that according to Lauren, she said that some of these kids just needed some glasses, but because they
Right.
didn't have the money or they didn't have health care, right? They didn't know how to ask for that. They felt embarrassed about it. And one of the things you hear
Right.
from the brother who runs the Lights Out program, the basketball thing, he said that he found out some of his kids were failing and suffering and missing days in school just because they didn't have clean clothes. See, these are
Right.
some
Yeah.
of the things I'm talking about on the front end
Right.
that we have to
Right.
discover with our people,
Right.
right? And we have to begin to solve some of those issues. And that is the same reason why a lot of our kids drop out of school. They're dropping out because of social issues. And
That's
this
right.
is why, Keesha, when me and you and Rakia was having a conversation I was having, and
Right.
Rakia and I absolutely feel this way. I don't think they pay you the kind of money that you're actually worth, Keisha,
Say
and
that.
what you
Say
really
that.
mean to our
Mic
community,
drop again.
right?
Pada. Mm-hmm.
There's no goddamn way, Keisha, that and this is no knock on the police director in my mind, but in my mind, I think if your salary is not as equal as his or damn near close to his, well, I just don't think they're doing you justice because I think you know exactly what our community needs. I think that's clear, right?
Dig
And
this.
I think
To
you
your
know the
point,
work that
yeah,
needs to be done.
And
they're
and and Ed,
both
and
saving
that's
lives. I'm sorry, Donna. They're
no. I was going
both
to go ahead.
saving lives. They
Right,
got guns and the
right.
biggest budget in everybody, right? We got just enough to function a little bit. But we're saving lives.
Right.
Go ahead, Donna.
But
I'm
I
sorry.
think, but no, I think what Ed just said is perfect because if we look at perhaps suburban school districts, they do put their money where their concerns is, whether it's in books, computers, and things like that. And if you look at a superintendent salary and say Parsippany, or as opposed to what Keisha, you're not the superintendent, but you're the director over violence prevention. The money should be going there because we don't want to get to the police director. We want to prevent that from happening.
Right.
And
Right. We don't
the
want these
sister,
kids criminalized,
right?
right?
The,
We
the
don't
That
want
sister
these
who
kids
wrote,
criminalized.
and
We
if we
don't
go
want to
back
see them in that system.
the sister who wrote the new Jim Crow, and she said at one point we was on par that jails, the numbers were decreasing.
that's
And
right.
so, but they're feeding a system that they really want to feed. And so that's where we have to begin to educate so that the money does go to the violence prevention as opposed to the director of the police and things like that.
Well, I would certainly say that the police director job is tough because we're in a lot of spaces together, and I certainly know there's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of work, and so
All
you're right
sides.
in terms of us building equity. Like we're really searching to and looking to build equity in this work because social workers and case managers and crisis interventionalists, right, are all valuable in this work. And so
Right.
we have to shift the culture around how we see this work and how we see people. So I think that that's certainly important as to how we do that. Um, and so yes, they have not put value on this work and
Right.
professionalized this work enough.
Right.
And so we have to place more value on it so that they place more value on it.
And we got to be the change that we need to see.
Right,
And we have to be it and do it in a way so that everybody sees it.
right.
Oh, and Keisha, real briefly, just so the community will know how on the museum and the police station that was reallocated to you, how's that coming along and how far along are you with that?
I'm sorry, ask me again.
The police station that Mayor Baraka and where the museum is going to be and the space that you're going to be working on, how far are y'all with that space?
So my team is there. They are in there. They have started working out of the space. So I have caseworkers, social workers, um, outreach workers and the Brick City Peace Collective is in a space at 10 17th Avenue. And then right next door, right next in the parking lot, we have the substation. We did build a police station because folks were very upset that the police department there was closed to make that office. And I certainly understand how folks feel that they need, because some people feel like more police is more safety. They don't want to see us. They don't see us as safety. But we did, there is a community substation police department right there. And then our office is right there. So we are still going to build out the museum. We are working out of that space. So it is being utilized, but it's in the process of being renovated. So we're working on renovations, but we are using the space and we are in the building.
And to that, how is the community having an aha moment? Say, okay, maybe this is a good thing. Is the mindset changing? Because you said they were upset. So are they coming along as the program comes along?
We're working because we have to now do outreach in the community to let them know that we're there. We have to, because people have seen that as a police precinct for so long. Right. And so, with change comes resistance right. And adjustment, right? And adaptation. So we're still adjusting. The community is still adjusting, but we're right there by Central High School. So we're helping in the neighborhood in terms of the students being able to have safe passage, if you will. And so we are visible there in the area, but we do need to do some community outreach and let the community know that we're there and help them to see why we're there. But the police are there, we are there. And so I think that they feel more comfortable with having something in a substation versus having nothing.
So it became a win-win situation. Awesome.
Yeah, and that goes back to this whole question of language. Keesha, before you got on, one of the things that we talked about is the challenge of language. Jonathan highlighted it in Biden's mouth on one level, but the whole question of the use of the language defund the police and whatnot is not just something that the police have pushed back on, but within our own community, a lot of our folks really do not understand what that actually looks like. Right. And have to rely on that old paradigm for so long and being overwhelmed in their mind with the continued presence of some of this violence, it's hard for them to adjust. And I tried to explain why it was important for us to change the language and use refund the community, right? To do that so we can operationalize. We're not just having the discussions, but we're having the discussions as we're trying to operationalize the work, right? And operationalizing of the work, people can then begin to see what it is that we've been talking about.
Right. And some people are not going to understand the work from the perspective that we do just because we've been in it for so long, right? So before there was an Office of Violence Prevention, there was a Newark Anti-Violence Coalition. How about that? Right. There was, Saving Ourselves and Street Warriors and all these different organizations who were on the ground fighting against violence and trying to help the community, but not knowing that we would get this to this place where we are changing policies, right? Where we are getting city buildings and we are certainly pushing the lever in terms of organizing, right? And coordinating work, from a bigger place, right? To where we are looking to be a national model, right? We never looked that far ahead. We never looked to build infrastructure and get investment into the work. We just wanted to help our people. But also knowing that many of us have been doing this work for free for so long, we didn't have the language. I remember being in the office with a person who was a PhD, and he was ultimately saying that I was hijacking the work and I didn't know what I was talking about. But I knew what was happening on the grounds, but academically, I couldn't label it. I couldn't name it. I didn't have best practices. I didn't have the metrics. I didn't have the outcomes, any of those things. And now we are in that society when you're being asked to, how are you measuring the work, right? How do you know if you have an impact? How do you know if you have an outcomes? And that becomes the challenge, right? Because many of us who are hands-on don't know how to measure the work, right? We don't know research, evaluation, any of those things. We just know we're helping people. And so that becomes our challenge. But we don't want to be so 30,000 feet high that we forget, the level of ground zero and how important that work is.
Mm-hmm. And then that divide, and we have to bridge that divide,
right?
To have that and bring them into the fold,
right?
Right? You know how to do that? Okay, check. Here are our folks, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is their names. Then this is where they were. And this is where they at. You go ahead and do the metric stuff, and then put it in them papers and whatnot, and so we can keep rolling.
Right.
Language to explain that. But
You
there
know,
have
one,
been real
one, one,
partnerships, though. But to be more specific, there have been real partnerships from those institutions, who, by the way, had to be made to see that they too are natural stakeholders in this. That was one
Right.
of the points of our protests back then, right? That they should be using their skills to serve the community as opposed to just being academic about it.
Right.
and that was the disconnect, right? Because for the most part, these people were on campuses and
Did it freeze, or was that us? Was that me?
utilizing the problem community instead of doing something to solve it. You all remember when the Nation of Islam back in the day were actually, in these buildings and trying to bring peace, and then of course the Republican Party fought hard to take this word, defund them.
Thank you.
Right.
Exactly.
While they were busy saving lives in the Black community, and the most important thing was that they were not criminalizing young people, right? So when things were happening in those buildings or happening in the community, they didn't call the police. They understood
Right.
how to meet these brothers and sisters where they were,
Right.
and they had that level of respect. However, you look at this thing 20 years later, the Nation of Islam doesn't have that same respect in the community, right? Because they fought hard and they fought long to defund them brothers and sisters who were actually doing the work in the Black community. And remember, like Keesha just said, they were doing that work for free when they would be, going through the community, some bean pies or selling the Muhammad Speaks a Final Call. I'm going back to when I was doing that, right? And just now, with these different organizations who came behind after them and doing the work for free, like Violence Interrupters and so forth. I mean, white folk are going to fund what they believe is important, right? And they're going to fund who they believe is important.
Right.
And that's why we've got to push. And that's why, and the real truth is, if we completely honest, you all know that this would not have happened had not it been for a mayor like Mayor
That's
Barack.
right. That's true. That's very true.
That's just true.
Mhm.
Because we've had Black mayors, right? And this conversation has been brought up with them because I've been in the room with some of these cats, and they couldn't see their way clear how to take 5% from a police budget and give it to Black organizations. They couldn't see that. So unless we had a progressive brother like this, no hell that we would have a director, Keesha Eure, and have these organizations. Because even Keesha, I can remember you and I, Keesha, was talking about, how can we finally get, the anti-violence, the Newark Anti-Violence Organization funded because of all the work, all them days for almost an entire year being in the street, man.
Mm-hmm.
Never been done. Think about that. That's historic.
Right.
Was. It absolutely was. We changed
That's
the paradigm, and I know Keisha got to. I know we had to wrap this segment up in a second. In terms of what's happening, what is any announcements you want to make? Any new developments that you want us to be enlightened on and build around as you get ready to jump off? What's our next? What's our orders, daughter? Come on, Director Eure.
Well, the next is for us to, continue to support the work and support organizations who are on the grounds doing the work and who haven't been recognized before. So many of the organizations, such as Hear My Cry and the STEP program, I'm actually about to go into their International Black Queens Day program right now.
Are they supposed to be lifting up my sister Zul Latifa. I wanted to come, but what we're doing this right here, and it's something that I want to do for that queen. She is hugely special, hugely special.
She's
Great
on right
warrior,
now, so
great
certainly
teacher, right? That's
rites
my
of
heart.
passage.
Was, old Newark chapter of the Black Panther Party, martial art master, African dance master, healer, great sister. Go do that. Give her my love. Till I got something coming for.
Okay, I'm
Yeah.
trying to minimize the noise. So I would just say the marching orders is for us to stay on top of these bills, to stay on top of the funding that's coming out,
That's
to
real
support
stuff.
organizations, but also for us to hold them accountable for the work that they're supposed to be doing. If they're supposed to be mentoring and doing rites of passage or recreation and social activities, mental health, whatever it is that they're supposed to be doing, that we make sure that we support them, but we also hold them accountable. We have a ton of our young people in the youth house. We need to, put some support around the youth house and some intervention there, because we have so many young people incarcerated. Our youth and adults increase in incarceration for violent crimes. There's going to be a release. They're doing, releases from, different jails, in the upcoming weeks. And we need to make sure that we are welcoming them home and giving them some real resources so that we don't have the rate of cycles of recidivism that we continue to have.
That's right.
But ultimately, violence as a public health issue, violence as a public safety issue, we move Newark forward and continue to hold the values. And everybody is important, even when we don't agree on issues. Just us knowing that the real place and the mission is for the hearts and minds of our people and for the community. And we just stay grounded in knowing what the real mission is and keeping the community in the center of everything. All politics are local, and I am out.
Thank you, beloved. It was beautiful.
All right.
And I have to meet her. We're doing some work tomorrow morning at the Shani Baraka Center on another front, and trying to build out these narratives also as we try and build support for this work. I believe we should have either DJ Rhino, or Congressman Payne should be coming on in a little bit, and then of course DJ Rhino will be on in just a bit. Are any of our guests ready yet? No. Okay. All right. So yeah, we are not yet. Okay. All right. Yeah. There's Congressman should be on any minute, right, Ed?
Yeah. The Congressman I got kicked off for a minute, but
we've all been having some issues. Something's going on. New thing with the 4G and the 5G and all these other Gs.
I heard
the OGs. It's the 5Gs and the 4Gs.
Yeah. I saw Councilwoman LaMonica McIver said, "What the hell is going on with my phone?"
Yeah.
Because mine was going crazy today too. I couldn't figure out what was going on.
That's why Keesha was having trouble getting on.
Yeah. I was like, "Yo, what's wrong with my?" I'm telling you, man, my phone wouldn't take. I couldn't get calls. I could get texts, man, but I couldn't make any calls. And I thought it was just me. And
I did too. I was actually trying to call her, and you know they interrupting the call. She tried to call me back. She couldn't do it.
Exactly. That's what was happening to me. And I was
nuts.
I just couldn't figure out what was going on, man. And then I found out that happened to a lot of us today.
Yeah.
So not really sure what that is, man. But remember, with us constantly updating our phones, I mean, it's giving these folks greater control over how we use them. And remember, we are becoming more and more dependent upon these things because we're basically walking around with a computer in our pocket. Right?
Say that. Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, that's what's happening now, man. All of us are walking around with these things in our pocket, and I mean, you damn near, it's so psychological, right? If you leave the house and you forget your phone, you turn around and get back as quick as you can because you're afraid you're going to miss something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I mean, it's absolutely nuts. And today was supposed to be the great turnoff day. people were supposed to turn off their phones today and stay off for 24 hours.
I
you
had
know
no
that?
idea.
Yep.
I didn't get the memo.
That's what the day was, right? It was about people staying off. Peace, Brother Rhino. Peace, brother.
DJ Rhino has come.
Peace. Yeah, I didn't know that either. I didn't know that
I
either.
did not get the
Yeah.
memo.
Unfortunately, the only time the phone is not in my hand is when I got to charge it up.
See,
Yes.
that's how psychological it is now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, for all of us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I hate the idea of being so dependent on those devices. My daughter, my baby girl, lost her phone one night. We were out, and this kid lost her mind.
Yeah.
I said, "Hold up, you gonna calm your behind down and get in the car because I can replace the phone, but you losing your mind. I can't. You're not gonna do that."
Yep.
But
That's
she
because people put
lost
so
her
much of their
mind.
lives in the phone.
Oh
put
my
so much of their
God!
lives in the
Yeah.
phone.
And
You know what
they,
I mean?
they don't know a time.
Nowadays, when you lose nowadays losing your phone is losing your wallet, your keys, everything.
Yep.
You know what I'm saying? You losing your social security card, all of that stuff, your license.
Because
Like
think
all
about it,
all of
everything
your valuable information and your precious, things, man, are in your phone now.
Yep.
And as soon as you lose that, man, that's everything. And so
Yep.
people
All
lose
your
their mind.
contacts. Right.
Well, she was just 16. She ain't had all that in the damn phone. But those relationships, that they build and keep within them damn things.
But that's how she socialized.
Whoa.
Yo, what's good, Rhino?
What's going on, brothers?
You, man.
Yeah, man. So I mean, it's not a whole lot actually, man. I just wanted to shout out all the Boogie Down Productions, which is why I got on this shirt.
Yes.
Rest in peace, Miss Melody. Rest in peace, Willie D. Both from Boogie Down Productions. Rest in peace, Scott LaRock, who 2 days ago just had a birthday. So rest in peace and happy born day to the spirit of Scott LaRock from Boogie Down Productions. Also, yeah. Also, yesterday was the anniversary of Boogie Down Productions' very first debut album, Criminal Minded. I believe it's the 35th or 36th. It dropped in 86.
It's been that long.
Yeah, man, that was a long time ago, man.
Yeah.
A long time ago. But that was when KRS was just coming out.
He was killing it. Yeah.
Yeah. And really, to be honest with you, man, it wasn't until after the loss of Scott LaRock, after Scott LaRock had passed,
right.
That's really when KRS got super conscious.
That shift. Yes.
And really just flipped again. Because you remember on the very first album, Criminal Minded, it was called Criminal Minded. And on the album cover, they're holding guns and grenades. Right. They're sitting there at the table.
Right.
He had a song on the album called 9mm. They were talking about, when they were selling weed and stuff like that. So it was a real street album, you know what I mean? But he had songs like Poetry and Elementary that kind of displayed some of his consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
But after Scott LaRock's passing, he flipped totally
sharp shift.
Yeah, he just got sharp with it, and he's still strong to this day. I mentioned it last week that he just recently dropped a new album called IMAMCRU12.
Yes.
Yeah, and now recently he just put out like he got about maybe 4 videos, I would say, to the various songs that's on that album. Now he's doing like kind of like how Jay-Z and Kendrick would do, where they doing like videos for the whole album. So he's putting out videos like every other day. I'm seeing a new video for one of the songs on the album. So definitely check it out, because KRS-One is definitely back in effect, man. He never left. He's been doing it. You know what I'm saying? He's just been on the underground because mainstream ain't really giving him no run like that right now. You know what I'm saying? They're not paying attention to those kind of artists now. Unfortunately, but he's still banging it out, man. He's still coming hard with it, and he does not miss a step on what's going on today. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So definitely check that out. And big up.
We had a good few minutes with him when he came through for the 24 hours apiece this year.
Yeah,
he came through this year. We had some good moments with him.
Yeah, that's right. And I was supposed to interview him that day. It was crazy. Just trying to get
him. We actually did a little video. We did a little cipher behind Source of Knowledge. Hakeem got it. I don't know if he's posted it up yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, we had a good few minutes. It was good to have him come through.
Yeah. So big ups to KRS-One and salute and respects to Scott LaRock and everybody at the Boogie Down Productions.
Yeah.
Also, today I want to say happy born day to Grand Poobah of Brand Nubian and Masters of Ceremonies fame. Grand Poobah just had a born day today. You know, it's funny. I think I may have told this story before, but Poobah somehow not somehow. Poobah has become my cousin-in-law in a strange way. Years ago, back in the early 90s, I used to date Poobah's cousin, and her and I were real tight, and we were going to get married in '94 and all this stuff. Years went by, things didn't happen. Then years go by, and now Poobah married my cousin, and so now he's my cousin-in-law. So it was like it was destined to happen that way anyway.
Wow.
So big ups to my cousin-in-law, Grand Poobah. But from Brand Nubian.
Brand Nubian.
Just had his born day. I think. Oh, also, 3 Feet High and Rising, De La Soul. They also had an anniversary for their debut album, 3 Feet High and Rising. That was also an anniversary yesterday. So big ups to De La Soul. That was their big album that they were having huge issues with trying to get get the rights to, get the masters to with their label Tommy Boy Records, because they couldn't get any of that streamed. And I believe the next few albums after that they couldn't get streamed either because of rights issues. Mm-hmm. But luckily they've overcome all of that, and they got hold of their masters, and they're able to stream and get money and make money and stuff. So big ups to them, and big ups and happy anniversary to the to 3 Feet High and Rising, man. That was a huge album, man. It was a very, very groundbreaking album. When that album came out, it was a sound that you didn't have in hip hop at that time. You had a lot of street b-boy stuff that was going on in hip hop at that time. And when De La first came out, they were talking about the Daisy Age and stuff, and it reminded you of like the Woodstock days and back in the hippie days, and they just brought in a whole
it had a late 60s sound. Yes.
Yeah, a whole different sound, a whole different vibe and energy, you know what I'm saying? It was real peaceful, but it was very honest and open. You know what I'm saying? And later down the line, they linked up with a Tribe Called Quest, created Native Tongues, and they became a whole family, man. But big ups to De La Soul, because they stuck to it. They stuck to their guns, man, when it came down to being them and not crossing over and doing any of these little compromises. They stuck to their guns, man, and they're still real dope and top tier in their game. So big ups to De La Soul. And so one other thing I wanted to bring up, what's really big that's getting talked about, and I don't listen to drill music. I'm not familiar with drill music like that, but I know you guys have heard about
it's coming up.
Eric Adams.
It's coming up in a lot of discussions. It's coming up in discussions and trying to do this work with trying to deal with this violence in the streets wherever it's happening. Right.
So so now it's said that he's talking about putting a ban on drill music. I guess in New York City he's trying to ban where it's getting played. I'm not really sure how that's going to work. How do you ban music? I mean, we've kind of been through this before. When it comes down to talking about banning music, hip hop has gone through this before with the gangster rap stuff in the early 90s, late 80s, when NWA and Dr. Dre and Snoop and all of them were doing stuff. They had the whole gangster rap thing. And then rap in general, when it first came out, went through this. Rock and roll has gone through this. Bebop and jazz has gone through this. When certain things are not understood or not looked at or investigated thoroughly, you have these kind of situations. Because personally, when we're talking about banning music, we have to understand that it's not the music that's creating the situation. What the music ends up being is it ends up being theme music to the situation that's going on in the streets. Like I saw on the podcast, there was one brother that was talking about, he made his own choices to get involved in the streets and sell drugs and all that. That wasn't music that made him do that. But then when 50 Cent came out, he said that became my theme music. That became music for me to relate to. Like, you know, that music was speaking the world that I was living, you know. And so this music becomes theme music for these artists or for people that listen to this music. You know what I'm saying? So my thing is, you know, and there was a rapper in this podcast that was saying what needs to change is the situations, the circumstances in the community. If we can get changes in the community,
we need some scene changes in the hood so we can have some different themes
exactly. Let's change the theme in the community. Let's change what's going on in the communities, and then we won't need this theme music. You know what I'm saying? We won't look to this music to have to relate to, you know, to speak to what we're living. You know, and so, I mean, that's just my take on it, because like I said, I'm not familiar with drill music, but what I do understand about it is that it's young kids, you know, doing raunchy stuff, man. And every generation of every genre has gone through it. I've seen it. You know, we had it in the early days of hip hop. You know what I mean? It didn't get any play on the radio, but it did exist. You know what I'm saying? And when it did start getting played on the radio, you know, we talking about NWA and stuff like that, you know, and then that's when we had the issue with
a total different direction at that point. That's right.
So the whole thing is, you know, like I said, this is my opinion. We need to change what's going on in our communities, and then we could talk about the music changing. But banning the music is not going to change what's going on in the communities. If these kids still don't have jobs, or they still have depression issues, or economic issues, drug issues, whatever the issues are, if they have these issues, that theme music is going to continue. That theme music is going to be there to support what they're going through. You know what I'm saying? So we need to change what they're going through so that theme music won't be needed, and we have some other music to play along with the lives that they're living.
I love how you put that. I would love to pay you with my little sister soldier. We tried to say the same thing a long time ago. Folks didn't know how to take her. Now we just had the congressman in, and he just went back off.
Yeah, we wound up losing him. So
yeah,
gotta get him back. Y'all know if it's the first Friday, y'all know it's time for the Payne report. So hopefully you click back in, you know, and would love to hear his piece on that, because you know when he was running for office, remember he said his theme song was that Jay-Z song, "The Streets Are Watching."
Right.
You know, and so that goes to your point, right? When you said that the music becomes the theme music, you know, for some of these folks. What this stuff is now, I don't know if this drill music would be called theme music for them. I don't know if that's what it is.
Well, I mean, like I said, you know, what I do know from drill music, you know, it is a lot of, you know, it's a lot of drugs, alcohol, and, you know, living that life. But, you know, for these kids that are living that life, you know, they playing the music. They playing the music that's important.
Congressman, welcome to the Payne Report. And before you came back on, I was just saying that you can speak to that in terms of the theme music, because, you know, that's what you were talking about, you know, when you ran for office, when you said that Jay-Z song was your theme music.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. It spoke to me, and it was, you know, right on point at that time. I mean, it was like Jigger wrote that about me. And, you know, to know that, you know, he kind of was going through the same thing, but in a different element, a different genre, was just fascinating to me. So it really it's really synonymous, irrespective of where you are and what you're going through, that people tend to go through the same thing. You know, people streets are watching, you know, everybody, because I was Donald Payne Jr., they were watching to see what I did based, you know, on my father. And like, was I going to be as good as him? Was I going to do the things he did? How was that? You know, and people were waiting for me to mess up, and, you know, them to be able to respond to that and critique me. So that song, man, is you know how I feel about it, because it is what I was going through, and it's been, you know, my life.
And that's the thing that Rhino was talking about, how hip hop music back then, it was the theme songs, right? It was like, when they said every superhero need a song, right? Something that
Right.
keeps you moving. And just that lyric that you would quote, when you would say that, you know, if you kill me, you know what I mean? What
Right.
happens, that whole fact is that, these cats get famous off of doing something to you, you know what I
Right.
mean?
And you
And it's
can't respond in that way because you got everything to
right,
lose.
right,
Like
right,
you can't even defend yourself, you know?
right.
It's everybody
And
watching.
right. And that's real talk. You putting them on stage, right? And that's what happens, right? When, for most of us, once we
Right.
start moving in a certain way, we can't act as stupid or out of control as everybody else. Not that we don't
Right.
want to, but we
Right.
understand that, there's a price that we have to pay for that. And it's not just us
Absolutely.
paying the price, it's everybody behind us. They gotta
The
pay for that.
ramifications are great.
Right. And that
And
and
so
that
you
and
cannot
that's what it
operate.
comes down to. Yeah.
Right.
And so that's why Rhino was just, he was just talking about, because I gotta be honest, man. I didn't know what the hell drill music was, right?
Yeah, what
'Cause-
yeah, I kind of came in on the middle of that too. So
Yeah, I mean, I like what I was saying. I don't really know much about it myself. I just know
okay.
it could get pretty raunchy. You know what I'm saying? And
Okay.
it's pretty, and it's a lot of it is young kids. You know what I'm saying? A lot of it's young kids. It's basically trap music on steroids. You know what I mean? And we already know how trap music is. You know what I'm saying? So drill
Right.
music is just a little bit extra. You know what I'm
So it's
saying?
the next level, and then there's be something after drill that's
Right,
beyond that. So yeah,
right, right.
it
So this is what I'm saying.
just
It's like
keeps going.
we just keep adding layers onto the issue instead of curing the actual sickness. You know what I'm saying? We just throw on the layers. Just keep
Hey
putting
brother, you know what? I'm a little worried, man. You know what that means? That means you're getting old, man.
hey man,
You're getting old.
yeah,
it
yeah.
happens because I remember listening to some of the raunchy stuff when we were younger. We listened to it a little bit of it. But so I understand the stages, and how
Yeah,
it works, man. But
yeah.
but as elders, we gotta direct it properly.
Well, Congressman, it's your show, my
Yeah.
brother. So what's going on, man?
Yeah. Sorry it's a little late. I got a little jammed up, but how y'all doing? Where's Donna K?
She was just on.
She
She
should be
signed
back.
off.
She should be
John
back
wasn't
in the
able to
middle
do
of
it.
the.
All right. Yeah, well,
John sharpening up his knife so he can come and deal with you. He said, "I don't want the congressman to cut me up too bad tonight."
good old John. Yeah. So, well, this week was the State of the Union, and we see that mess going on over there in the Ukraine, and
Yeah.
it's really been good the way that the world has kind of come together on this thing in a good way. Um, if they continue to allow this madman to do this, he's just going to keep going. So, hopefully, we'll be able to take some action and keep him to a minimum, because he wants to recreate the old Soviet Union, the way it was when he was a kid. He's having dreams of the past, and it's just unfortunate how even in the Congress, we had somebody yelling, they're out there going Putin, Putin, like cheering him on, and I'm like,
During the State of the
and
Union?
yeah, and all y'all are old enough to remember when they wanted us to think that the Soviet Union was the big evil,
Right.
big evil threat in the world, and And now these Republicans, the same ones that used to sing that song, are cheering him.
Right.
It's, the world is backwards, man. I mean, it's just crazy. The world is backwards. There been a black president, and half of us were rooting for the Celtics that year. It was like backwards. I was like, that year that Obama won, I said, man, the world is backwards. We were rooting for the Celtics, and Obama was in the White House. I said the whole world is backwards, man. Never thought we'd root for the Celtics, right?
Yeah.
Right. Larry
But,
Bird.
yeah, so it's just really unfortunate that it's come down to this, and I don't know what's going to stop him, but he's got to be stopped. He's just a madman. To say he's the richest man in the world, because he can just take whatever he wants out of Russia, So, but they've really got to knuckle down and really go after his wealth. They haven't done that yet. They haven't actually gone towards his freezing his assets, but they need to go ahead and do that. And also they need to, shut down the oil coming out of Russia. They won't do that because, that's going to kind of mess with their gas prices. Oh, wait a minute, hold it. Don't do that. You can do everything to them, but hey, don't cause our gas to go up. I mean,
Right.
it's unfortunate that we get that selfish, that they'll do everything, but don't make my gas prices go up. So, but that's got to happen. That's going to be the only way you're going to get him in a chokehold, is if he's not able to get that oil money. And I want to commend the Newark City Council. They passed a resolution to close down all the Luke Oil gas stations in Newark, which directly get their oil from Russia.
That's Russian oil. Yeah.
So I want to commend them for that. That was a very bold move, and they should be recognized for that.
Yeah.
The other thing about the Ukrainian issue is the African immigrants that were living in the Ukraine, face significant delays when they're trying to cross into neighboring countries. And, despite, a massive outpouring of support for Ukrainian refugees, of course, once again,
Talk about it.
people of color are trying to leave the Ukraine and have been, they've been refused entry into some of these countries. And so, we have looked at it at the caucus, and we're trying to figure out how we can, interject ourselves into that issue. And, we discussed it this week at the CBC luncheon. Haven't really come to a conclusion, but, we're ongoing and have, folks that are knowledgeable in that area trying to figure out what we can do. We're also going to, talk to the Biden administration in reference to that. They were basically saying that only women and children could pass through, but they're letting some Ukrainian men through, and whenever a black lady would try to pass, they said, "Our women first." And so, we're it's a very tenuous situation. So, there's been a statement of condemnation from the African Union, and reports of the Africans are singled out for unacceptable dissimilar treatment, and would be, it's just shockingly racist and, violates international law. The African Union said. And then once across the border, these refugees still face, danger. Ultra right. Poland is not necessarily the most liberal country.
That's right.
There is in the EU, and I think there actually been attacks of these Africans, South Asian and Middle Eastern refugees, from the Ukraine. So it's a serious situation, and you can only go west. So we're paying attention to it, and are trying to figure out how we can help. But we've raised our voices in opposition to it, and trying to make sure that the world knows what's going on with these folks. So I'm working with my colleagues to make sure we hold these countries accountable for their treatment of Black refugees.
Yeah, I read an article this week where it said that Nigeria was sending a plane or planes to pick up, those Nigerian students who were in Ukraine because of the level of violence that was being promoted against them by white folks in Ukraine, which is absolutely unbelievable. It's just like, I mean, you guys want sympathy from the world for Russia invading the country, but you would attack Black people in that country, and that, I mean, you begin to lose focus off of that because now all of a sudden the attention is going to go to that. It's no longer going to be on Russia attacking you, because the sympathy for the world, or the sympathy that would come from the Black community for them in terms of support, Black folk will begin to say, well, wait a second, we were supporting you, but now you attacking Black folks in the community in Ukraine who were just there going to school or living there as Africans from other countries.
Yeah, normally if this wasn't happening, they'd be putting the Africans out first. Now they're talking about Ukraine folks first. I mean, it's totally backwards. It's not surprising. I mean, as much as we go through in this country, there are a lot of places around the world that are just as bad, and we don't talk about it because we're dealing with our issue here. But there's a lot of ultra racism in all these countries. This is where the folks that are here came from. So why wouldn't their origins be of that? So
that's right. That's absolutely right. They and that's why when they took when he was talking about, if those bombs had hit that nuclear plant, that would have been the end of Europe, right? And because you're right, the majority of white folks in this country all come from Europe. That's their homeland, right? So when you talk to them, they come from those European countries, and so that level of racism that has been promoted against us for 400 years, it's still there with those people.
That's with their origins. That's the origin of it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's not. I mean, it's not a surprise to us, right? That's what's really happening. But what it is that at the same time, when you look at all the major news networks, you see them trying to humanize what's happening to them, right? And want sympathy, not just from the white folks in this country, but Black Americans as well. They want sympathy from. But how could we have sympathy for that if you folks that are out there mistreating other Black folks that are out there who are also trying to leave the country for safety?
It's interesting. Charlie Rangel, who I used to sit with, great, just used to just sit next to him and under him and just listen to him, man. Just impart that knowledge on me. And he came up with this really deep thing one time. He went before the caucus and he said he's just been, just been trying to understand why, what could Black people have done to insult God so much that we find ourselves in this position in the world. What was it that we did that would allow God to have us in the conditions we find ourselves in? And I just thought that was so deep where he went with that. I was like, wow. I mean,
and he did that on the floor of Congress?
No, he did it at one of our lunches at the CBC.
Oh,
I was like,
okay.
man, it was so profound the way he
Right.
put it. And he was just trying to make the point that what we have to fight and are up against are, insurmountable odds at times that, it's us against the world. It's almost, we had to have slighted God in some way for us to find ourselves in this situation. And I just thought it was so deep to make you think about it in that manner that I'll never forget that little speech he made that day. I'm paraphrasing some of it, but he got into it deeper. But I can't remember all of it, but it just always stuck with me. We're up against it everywhere in the world.
Yep.
We're up against it everywhere in the world because we cannot hide the fact that we're Black. It's a color coding. It's why slavery worked so well. I mean, there was nowhere you could hide. You wore slavery on your skin, on yourself. And it's just really just profound in what we are up against, but have been able to succeed in, to certain degrees. I mean, irrespective of what we've been up against, we've been able to, in some areas thrive and carve out a little space for ourselves in this world. We've come a long way and still got a long way to go. But anyone that thinks that this is going to go away, it's going to be a while before that happens. And we just got to, figure out how to use the law and, the morals of mankind to push forward and succeed. So,
And Congressman, that speaks to when you talk about our condition and where we are, and based on what the Congressman had said to you, you think about what just happened, a couple of weeks ago to the young brother in Bridgewater, Zakai.
right.
Right. And that's
Rally tomorrow, 11 o'clock, by the way.
Where?
Bridgewater. They're going to assemble at the police station and they're going to march to the mall.
Okay.
And so you look at that, Congressman, and that's at the end of the day, right? That could have been any of our children, right?
Anyone, any of
just young black teenager being in the mall, right? And all of a sudden, the cops come up and because of what the hell is in their mind, right? They don't see the other kid as being the provocateur. They see the young black kid as the provocateur, and they didn't give a damn who he was related to, right? And think about it, with somebody that heavy putting their knee in your back, could you imagine what kind of damage they could have did to this young man?
Ed, Ed, how about just putting his knee in his back after we just come off of this major case about putting a knee on somebody's neck? How about, and just to see that done again is just,
right.
Yeah. Hey, Donna K.
Wait, hey, Congressman, did you talk about the State of the Union yet?
We not yet. Go ahead. Did you right on
I just
time?
wanted, just to, Congressman, we spoke earlier this week and we saw some behavior that was unseemly. Could you give us your take on the State of the Union, how Biden did? How do you think your colleagues responded, and on both sides? And what were some of the highlights for you?
Um, well, it was kind of surreal that night because of the way they had us set up. They have lifted the mask requirement on the floor of the house, but they decided to social distance us. And so, half of us were in the gallery and, half on the floor. And so it almost kind of sounded empty, where normally you have, the 435 and the 100 members and the Supreme Court and the ambassadors all on the floor, about 600 people on the floor. It was maybe 200. And so the whole vibe was kind of strange. And, I think President Biden did well. I think, we've got a lot of work before us in the Democratic caucus. What we've done for the American people is just not resonating. And for the life of me, I don't know why. I mean, what we've done to, keep this country afloat during the pandemic and families and, the monies that we have allocated to keep this country going is historic. And, this infrastructure bill that is going to, rebuild our country is historic. And nobody seems to see what we've done. It's going to be very difficult for us to hold on to the House.
Yep.
And to be honest with you, a lot of Democrats that shouldn't have any problem are going to be in tough races because people are dissatisfied with the Democratic Party, with the president, and our leadership, and it's going to trickle down to, some of us in the House. I'm in a very tough primary. So, I mean, and it's because of the feeling out there, about Congress and about Biden. And so I don't know what has to happen, but it's very concerning. And, we're trying to do what we can to get the people to understand. But, for some reason, our message is just not resonating with the American people. And it's unfortunate because we have done a lot in the past several months for them with respect to keeping their families afloat, keeping their families healthy, and businesses viable, and this country where it needs to be. So I'm just baffled by it. Maybe each one of you could tell me, what you're feeling about it to give me some idea.
What you
Well,
say?
Not to cut you off, Donna, but I think what's going to have to happen, though, Congressman, is you're going to have to tell your own individual story, right? You're just going to have to tell it because Biden didn't do a good job of that last night, given the record, right? For how well Congress did in terms of coming out of that whole Trump 4 years, and then coming up out of the country almost being taken over, on January 6th, and then talking about what was done in order to bring it back from the brink. And now you got the Republicans lining up and organizing behind him to go backwards as opposed to going forward. How in the hell could that be? And then at the same time, we just lived through a pandemic. I mean, just think
Right.
about all of the, and then think about the millions of people that died, and had not it been for Congress, right, infusing the money, the child tax credit, and all of that into the system, we would be worse off.
Right.
And so somebody's got. That's why I'm saying, if he's not going to tell a story, Congressman, you got to tell your story. But then also they've got to do something, right, in order to appease the very voters that they need. Because remember, even when I heard Tamika Mallory said, by him making that statement last night on one hand and having passed the George Floyd and policing bill, and then say fund the police, and black people still haven't seen the voting rights bill, and black people said, well, we hear you saying do that, but we haven't gotten that, right?
Right.
And so people are confused on one hand, because this big conversation we had around the police. Nobody wants to get rid of police, but we also understand that in the black community we do have some police that are killing people like George Floyd in our community, and we
Right.
do know
So
something needs to be done about that.
right. So that's where the difference is. You can't defund the police, but it does have to be restructured. And that's what we need to get people to understand. It's about restructuring the police department. It's not about defunding. So and I wanted to put that on the record. I do not support defunding the police. I support retraining, reevaluating, restructuring how police departments operate. But defunding the police, I cannot grasp that notion. So but definitely it needs to be torn down and revamped and recreated in another model, but not to the degree where we don't give them the resources that they need in order to operate. That's something different than restructuring or getting rid of the bad apples. We need to put stuff in place, like in the George Floyd bill, in place to deal with those officers that operate, on that
Right.
level. And guess what? It could be a few of them. It could be a few bad apples, or it could be a lot of bad apples. But to defund the operation won't do the community much good. We need to restructure, reevaluate, and reevaluate the people that we allow to go into that vocation. And that's what has to happen.
Congressman, before you, when your dad was in that seat, did you ever get to attend the State of the Union as his, with your dad?
Yes.
So, and I'm asking that because the two representatives who yelled out at the president, they're young, and so their decorum was horrible.
Right.
Um, and I even think Lindsey Graham was upset when the camera went to his face. Reflecting that you've had the privilege to be, around, for a while, because of your dad. What was the sense when they responded like that? What was the sense of the house, of the room when they
Well,
acted like that?
they were chided and booed down, and some people from the lower level said something towards them, but it was not received well in the House. And it's unfortunate now that the president, and it started with Obama, with "You
Yeah.
Lie,"
Yeah.
and so now the decorum of the House has deteriorated to the point where you're not even allowed to express your opinion or your ideas on the floor of the House of Representatives without showing the office of the president the respect that it deserves. And you may not agree with the president, but that decorum is absolutely unacceptable in the House. And so, but that's what we're dealing with these days. And there's definitely something that is going to have to be dealt with and addressed, because it's just continuing to go downhill.
And finally, the Supreme Court, his announcement about the Supreme Court justice. Was that your choice, and how do you think it's going to go? What's the congressman's prediction on this?
I to be honest, I was not too familiar with most of the candidates when they were brought up. I've done some reading on them now, but the only one that I had a relationship with and had spoken to on numerous occasions was Miss Eiffel, and she's former attorney for the NAACP, and so she was the only one that I actually had any type of relationship or interacted with prior to now. So she was kind of my candidate because of familiarity, but I really didn't have a real horse in the race to say. So I was just hoping, and I was just proud, and I'm probably going to do an op-ed on, when we've had these conversations early on, when you guys were asking me about Biden and I was defending him, that the thing for me is that he kept his word, and is doing this and followed through on that. So I can, hold my head up high when I was telling you that he was a man of his word and he was going to do these things, that he has followed through on a Black female vice president and a Black female Supreme Court judge. So he has really fulfilled two of the promises that he's made to the African American community, and at a high level. So that allows me to walk with my head up high, as opposed to me trying to cover my face now when you guys are, I thought you said he was going to be this and that. So, I got my chest out with that. But, and I was, I shared with you that I was the other
Congressman,
Yeah.
you know damn well if you'd come home, we would have said that too.
I
We'd
know.
said, we said stay in Washington, because you know
Without
what
a
you
doubt.
said.
Without a doubt. I might not try to come home. But the other thing is that I'm very proud that I was actually part of that history, and that I was actually one of 6 people. Let's see, 2, 4, 6, 7 people in the room the night that Mr. Clyburn made the promise to endorse President Biden. He wanted it sooner than Mr. Clyburn did it, but Mr. Clyburn told him, in due time. He knew when, don't worry, he'll do it when it's right, and it sure was right. So I'm just, wasn't, too into the conversation, wasn't a real part of the deliberation of it, but was in the conversation.
Is it me or I can't hear the congressman?
No, I thought it was me too. I can't hear the congressman either.
Congressman, did you mute yourself?
Testing, Congressman. We can't hear you.
Did you mute yourself?
Connections.
Yeah. He may need to go in and come back out.
Yeah. He had to go in and come back out. DJ Rhino's in the house.
Is he still on? No, I think DJ Rhino left the building.
Congressman to go in and go back out.
Oh,
Hey,
okay.
DJ Rhino.
Congressman.
Well, he had to go in and come back out.
Oh,
Because his volume just dropped out.
Yeah.
But we're back to
I
that.
wanted to ask him because we're right on the anniversary of his dad's death too, right?
Oh, who?
This is when Congressman Payne Sr. passed in March, correct?
I don't know the exact date.
Yeah, I believe it was March.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but what did you think about the speech, Donna?
I only watched part of it, and I like, from a speech perspective, when he did that part, don't defund the police, fund them. He really got to rise out of the room, and I was like,
So
we
that's
got
what
to
he was going
explain
for?
that because, of course, I don't know, but sometimes when you're giving a speech, you go with the flow, and
Right.
and it worked, so. And most people hate that saying, defund the police. They hate it,
Yeah, that's
People
yeah.
people hate it. People that understand what it means
We have
still hate it.
regular folks within our community. They just folks, yeah, and they just the police. A lot of folks. But yeah, that's why we use refund the community.
Yeah, because the fact that you even said it earlier, Zaid, lets me know that you've been in some rooms where there was pushback. So the fact that what did you say? What term did you
we
use?
got to get stuff done. We can't.
But what term did you use, Zaid? You didn't say refund. You said reallocate.
Yeah, refund the community.
Zaid going out in and out too?
Yeah, so maybe StreamYard is having some problems. So we're right at the end. So DJ Rhino, what were you saying? Zaid, are you back?
He looked like he's frozen.
Yeah, everybody's going in. DJ Rhino, did you have any announcements?
The only announcement is tomorrow is my mom's born day, actually. Tomorrow's her birthday. So happy birthday to my mom. Of course, I'm doing the usual thing tomorrow on twitch.tv/RhinoCMZ. Check me there at 3 p.m. for the Saturday Shake Up. And I'm just going to get into some good grooves and stuff like that, some feel good vibes. But that's it. And Ed, I guess we'll talk behind scenes as far as what we're trying to do for the fundraiser.
I'll let this already mentioned.
Yeah, Zaid is going in and out, but he's getting ready to talk about they're going to be down in Bridgewater. I believe that's what he's going to speak about. So hopefully he'll get to come back on. And it's 100 Commons Way. I don't have the press release before me, but I believe it is tomorrow.
I think Larry put up a flyer, didn't he?
Yeah, we definitely have a flyer, and I don't know. If Zaid's put the flyer on All Politics or Local page, but we have to make sure that the word. Yeah, I know he's been posting it time after time. Yeah. So.
Let me see if I can find it. But yeah, it's supposed to be tomorrow.
100 Commons Way in Bridgewater, and that's in front of the police station, the municipal building.
So it's justice for.
Hear me now?
We got you.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Talk about tomorrow.
At the police station, 100 Commons Way, 11 a.m. Rally there, and they're gonna march to the mall. And back to put the focus on the mall. Okay. The mall banned the young man, and they're trying to make his mother and father pay for the furniture that got broken when the police jumped on the poor boy, right? So they're going to address the racism of the mall, right? The boy was already victimized by the police. Now they're going to address that. I can't be there. I'm saying that usually I would be there, but I have a work commitment that I have to deal with on this violence reduction front that we're working on. Right. So I have to stay local. I want to shout out on Women's History Month. Today is the birthday of an incredible Black woman, incredible Pan-Africanist, incredible artist who embodies all the stuff that we've been talking about, that we're trying to, lift up in terms of consciousness and bringing struggle in the arts and the village together. The late, great Miriam Makeba.
Oh, yeah.
3432.
Yeah.
March 4th, 1932. She literally died doing her thing. She was on a stage in Italy when she collapsed and took her last breath. So she died as she lived, being the embodiment of the dignity and the great long line of cultural artistic genius that has been our people and the dignity of Black women. The global
I
dignity of Black women. She's incredible queen. Loved her dearly.
That's crazy because I just mentioned Miriam Makeba today, so that's why. Because I was saying that I would love to see Kerry Washington do the Miriam Makeba story. I would love to see that. Just because of casting and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And I know she could probably do a great job. But I was just talking about Miriam Makeba.
Zaid, you don't want to see Kerry Washington as Miriam Makeba?
Kerry's a brilliant actress, and I'm an actor, right? She has the charisma as dramatically. Artistically, musically, you need somebody with some of that.
Yeah, but I think
South Africa has a theater tradition, right? That our people are not in touch with. South Africa has a thick Black theater tradition that grew up in our struggle against apartheid, right? So I'm sure they got somebody over there that would really light that up if that would have come to pass. Let me shout out another elder, right? March 1st was the great Harold Belafonte. He just turned 95.
Yeah.
And Ed, if you can get a hold of Gina, right, it would be cool because she doesn't recognize me when I try to reach out to her on Facebook. Harry was at Gary in 72.
I know. Yeah.
We definitely need to, get hold of him, interview him, do something, Yeah. He's March 1st. Makeba is March 4th. They performed and recorded together, right? Because Harry embraced her when she was being shut out here in the States, right? She came to the States after being shut out in South Africa, and because she was so strong, they shut her out here, right? And Harry recorded with her and to continue to keep her name lifted up in the international arena, and that was an important moment for them, and he of course, he staked out his own popularity and his own, livelihood at the same time too. And he's one of the very few that's left from that 95 years young on March 1st. Great Harold.
You're absolutely right. Hey, listen, man, we out of time.
Quick, I just want to say happy birthday also tomorrow for Grand Wizard Theodore, the inventor of the scratch in hip hop culture. Happy born to him. Also, happy born to Tina Maria. Tomorrow's her birthday also.
Wow. She had the funk too.
Yeah. All right, Donald, we're going to give you the last word. We want to say thank you to, of course, all of our guests. Thank the Congressman for coming on. And Zaid, you want to thank the other folks who was on earlier?
Oh, good show. Great Elise Boddie, Professor Strong, Red Rutgers, Newark, our beloved Keesha Eure, our Director Eure, Office of Violence Prevention. Of course, DJ Rhino just rocked it out. And we had our regular first of the month taste of DC from our own Congressman Donald Payne Jr.
Yep. Thank all of them. Donald, we'll let you have the last word.
No, I just want everybody to stay tuned and to, mark this time to be present as we begin to talk about elections, redistricting, and get people up on what's going on the new districts and everything. So please mark your calendars for Fridays from 6 to 9 because we're going to have a lot of great information coming to the community, and people need you to be listen so that you can have the information firsthand.
All right.
Mhm.
Well, there it is, y'all. We thank y'all so much for tuning in this week. We'll see y'all next week. It'll be the vote on next week. So we'll get at them. And so, of course, I'm your host, Ed Riley, along with DJ Rhino, Brother Zaid, and of course, the one and only Donna
Gotta be
Williams.
on the kid.
We thank y'all for tuning in.
And
See
you
y'all
don't
next week.
stop. And you
Peace.
don't stop.